Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Hey guys, welcome to our Tuesday Night Live. Really excited tonight. I have a great friend of mine sitting to my left, I guess, depending on which way you're looking at the screen. Could be to the right. And I have Adam Taggart. Adam Taggart in the house. So I'm going to do some introductions here. We'll get started. I just want to say that, Adam, I don't know about on the West Coast, but I know here on the East Coast, I've seen a massive shift in the economy, in the housing market over the last month. I'm not liking what I see. We've been talking about it coming, so I'm not surprised. But I am very, very unsettled because I'm actually scared that this is going to be, unfortunately, as bad as we've predicted with the way that the economy is going. And we're going to talk about that tonight, guys. We are live. If you have any questions or comments, you can chat them in. But without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Adam Taggart. Adam, thank you, sir, for joining us. How's your day going?
It's going great, Todd. Was very pleased to get the invitation to come back on so soon, and thrilled to be here.
Yeah, well, great. Well, why don't you just tell everybody about Thoughtful Money? You have a YouTube channel, and guys, we want, just so you know, you can go down in the show notes if you're watching it, even after we are live. Adam's links are there to his X, which I was very surprised to see that Elon Musk has a one-letter domain name. I'm not surprised because he has the money to pay for it, but one-digit domain name, x.com. He finally launched that. But your Adam's X link is down there, as well as his YouTube channel and his website. But Adam, just kind of tell us a little bit about Thoughtful Money, what you're doing really every week to educate people on what we think is about to come.
Sure, and I'll be super brief here. I'm assuming a lot of your audience has seen some of our prior interviews, Todd, but for those who haven't, yes, I run the financial media company Thoughtful Money, and as Todd said, it's really all about just trying to help the average person, the average investor, be more successful at building wealth. Really, the mission of the business is to help people fund their life goals, plain and simple. You know, money it can be a great thing, but it is a means to an end. It is not an end in itself. We want money so that we can actually do more things, have a better, more prosperous future. And so we're all about trying to help people, clarify what those end goals should be, and then help them manage and grow their money prudently, so that they've got a better probability of hitting those goals and being able to fund them. I kind of consider the channel a little bit sort of like 60 Minutes for Money, which honestly, Todd, someone could probably say about your channel too. So I do deep dive interviews with a lot of the best, the top experts in money, in the markets, in the economy. So I interview a lot of economists and professional investors and research analysts and other domain experts. And if there's one thing I hope that Thoughtful Money does well, and that I as an interviewer hopefully do well, is bring on the right people to talk about the most timely and relevant money related topics. But then a lot of times these domain experts, they're so steeped in their craft that they can oftentimes give a pretty sophisticated explanation of an answer to a question that I ask. And so it's my job to really distill down that answer into just regular Joe speak in a way that regular people can understand it and then hopefully take action on it. And as you said, Todd, yeah, I've got that website. I've got my Twitter or X account. I've got a Substack. Would love to have people, anybody that wants to come check out what we're about at Thoughtful Money over there. To do that, great. But at the end of the day, what I really emphasize for folks is information is wonderful, but it really doesn't have value unless you put it into action. in your life. So what I try to do is again bring on these great experts, help people see through their eyes and get the information that way. But then where possible, I use those platforms to try to connect viewers with, when relevant, solutions providers who can help them actually put that information into action. So whether you use one of my recommended solution providers, or whether you find one on your own, or whether you become a DIY investor, all that's great. But I just underscore, once you've actually spent a lot of time listening to folks like Todd and I on YouTube or elsewhere, don't just stew in the information. Figure out how you're going to put that into application in your own portfolios.
100%. And I will also say that it's great to be the one interviewing you, Adam, because, and I love your shows, and what we're hearing quite often now is really, a lot of people say it's doomer type stuff, and it's not really. It's real. It's what's happening.
I think you and I, it's easy to get painted with the doomer brush when you're talking about negative things. But if you're talking about negative things that are real, and you're just trying to help people become aware of them so that they can sidestep them or reduce their vulnerability to them, I just call that being pragmatic.
And you have to say, it would be very hard for people that are watching this show to say that they aren't feeling some type of crunch in one aspect or another. Mm-hmm. But we have a lot to unpack tonight, where we're headed with this economy as the election is quickly approaching, the prop up that looks like it's finally the catch up. But without further ado, we'll introduce here my friend Cliff Bobo. Cliff, you can tell everybody.
You're missing an A in my name, but that's all right.
All right, so we misspelled you.
Yep, there's an A in between each of the E's and the U's, but that'll be harder for people to name search and track me down, whoever's looking for me. Right?
Now they're really looking for you.
Well, hey, I knew that was kind of part of what might go with coming on Todd's big hit show. I saw Tucker Carlson the other day. He was saying that he went through the TSA, and they wanted him to put his face in some kind of scanner. And they asked him, he asked the guy, is this mandatory? And the guy said no. He said, all right, well, I'm not doing that. And it made me think of me coming on your show. I'm like, Tucker, I think it's a little too late, right? Like, I think everybody's pretty well got your face. But I was on Todd's Tuesday night, probably about 6 weeks ago, spur of the moment. And this one was a spur of the moment also. So that's kind of my caveat.
Well, you've been to many of our
I've
live
come and watched
broadcasts.
a couple times.
So
Todd and I talk very regularly about things going on. So I'm not totally new to it. But today also was a total spur of the moment. And that's kind of my wimp out, cop out of I have done zero preparation. And I'm starting to think that might be intentional on Todd's part to see, do you really know what you're talking about? Can you pull it out of the top of off the cuff? But I went into it last time. I've known Todd for about 15 years. We kind of randomly met through business things. And then we became buddies, and we really kind of reconnected about 2 years ago, just because we never really lost touch, but called up, hey, let's have lunch. And I knew he had started a YouTube channel. So I started watching his YouTube channel some, and that is really what got me into watching YouTube, because I'm outwardly and probably very stodgily and irrationally anti-social media in general. And I had watched some YouTube, but I had no clue of how much quality stuff was on YouTube. I'm totally copping to it. I had no idea. So I started logging on, and I will say with YouTube, or I'd say the world in general today, there is a lot of information. You're just constantly barraged with information coming from everywhere, from all sides, with all kinds of agendas. And I've found YouTube's one of those things where you got to have a really good filter. But if you have a good filter to filter out the garbage, there is just some phenomenal information.
Well, tell everybody who you are, and let's get on with it.
Out on YouTube. So I'm Cliff. Last name's pronounced Bobo. I went to school for a really long time. I went to law school. I went to MBA school. I was involved in a kind of specialty type sport that's big in Europe. And as long as I kept going to school, my parents were okay with me doing nothing but pursuing this sport that I was in love with. I used to be big into racing bicycles. So then finally came a time where I was too old to do that anymore. And I had a law degree and an MBA degree, and in finance, and what I did the first part of the majority of my career was the kind of harder core quantitative things related to big money lawsuits, a lot of loss income calculations, all related to corporate type things, and a lot of corporate bankruptcy. And then I started doing more what you would call direct corporate bankruptcy law, and I still do some of that, the financial part of it, really fancy spreadsheets, really, more than anything else. But you have to have an understanding of the backdrop, the legal backdrop that it's playing out in, because there's a very strict, rule set, so to speak, that you have to accommodate. And I got out of that somewhat gradually, but I am fascinated with what is going on now in the finance world, politics, and I really, out of a pure general interest of my own, I'm just fascinated with what's going on, and I've started following it even more closely, even though I do not work directly in the financial or the international monetary system. I've spent a lot of time listening about it and learning about it. I can't believe at my age that I feel like I've learned so much over the past 2 years. And I feel like we are about to live through a big part of history. And it's part of it's a gut feeling. I think it's a semi-educated opinion or feeling. But I was listening to Jeffrey Gunlock the other day. I'm sure you know who he is, Adam, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
He was saying, he's done very well for himself. I think he's kind of taken over the crown of Bond King from the PIMCO guy, whose name is escaping me right now.
Bob Gross.
Yes.
Bill Gross. Bill Gross.
Bill Gross, yes. And he said that, so the interviewer asked him, well, Jeff, you've done real well for yourself, and you've had a hell of a career and a long career. And he said, why are you still doing this? And this kind of resonated with me. And Jeffrey Gunlock said, well, really more than anything, I want to see how this movie ends. and that resonated with me, because we're getting ready to talk about it, but I really think that we are getting ready to live through a very unique part of history.
And then, guys, I'm Todd Sachs. I'm the host of our Sachs Realty podcast. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm a real estate broker here in Maryland, and we're seeing some very interesting things happen in the housing market, especially here right now. I know over the course of the last few years, we have been saying that the housing market was in for a massive correction. We are now seeing manipulation with the data that's out there, where they're kind of erasing the highs that we have to make now not look so bad. So the Fred charts have been updated, and I can tell you firsthand that my clients are now starting to get the deals that they've been hoping for, that they have been knocked out of. 2 deals over the last 2 days or over the last weekend, where my buyers have had a horrible search experience. The search, very limited inventory, and the ones that they did find, they were being outbid. But now 2 of our buyers, and by the way, both of them coming through our YouTube channel, which is fantastic, were successful in scoring their deals. So congratulations. You know who you are if you're watching tonight. But if you guys are looking to buy or sell real estate, we are here for you. If you're in Maryland, we also have an amazing broker network all over the country. But let's dive in. Here we are. And Adam, Cliff and I, so I hope you're ready, because as you can see, Cliff is not shy. And he's going to, we're both going to try and field, direct questions to you, to really get your take. We appreciate your macro, your look on, you're a scholar on macroeconomics and geopolitical issues that are happening all over the world. And more specifically, I want to just open this up with our middle class is under attack. And, it's been said that the top 1% are trying to destroy the middle class. Some people believe it's part of the plan. So as a macroeconomic and monetary policy scholar, Adam, look, you worked on Wall Street. You've been in corporate America. Who is and are we destroying our middle class?
The answer to that is sadly pretty easy. Yes. And I've got, I did take some time and put together some bullets on this. As you can see, I've got, probably 100 here already that kind of give evidence to that. I think to your point of like, some people who think it's all some part of a grand conspiracy. I think we might have talked about this in one of my previous appearances, Todd. I don't really think it is a cabal of Illuminati Bilderberg families that get together and have plotted world domination, and they're going to put us all in cages and turn us into batteries for the Matrix or whatever. I don't think there's a grand plan to do that. Now, that said, I think that you can kind of get to a similar destination just with parties that are in control of the system continuing to play the system to their own advantage, right? I think sort of understandably, those that have gained advantage are reinvesting that advantage to keep their advantage and slant the playing field even further to their interests. And what that does is that concentrates wealth, it concentrates power. And I kind of feel like that's where we are in the game. And it's going to be interesting, sort of to what Cliff was saying about, this crazy journey it seems like we're on, and wondering how the movie's going to end. I think we are kind of hurtling right now to answer a very interesting question. For those of us that watch sort of macroeconomic stuff and have concerns about the economy and all that stuff, an interesting question that I'm pondering more and more recently, and I literally just released a video on this morning with behavioral economist Peter Atwater, is, hey, what kind of crisis do we actually need to worry about more at this point? Is it a financial one or is it a social one? Because we're beginning to see the social frustration and anger and sense of betrayal mount. Obviously the election is going to be pouring jet fuel on those emotions. We're coming to a point here where either the top echelon of society that is hoovering up all the opportunity are literally going to win, and everyone else is just going to roll over and have to take it. Or enough of society is going to rise up and say, you know what, this is not working for us. This is not the American way. And, we demand reform, and the ways in which that demand for reform gets expressed could be very interesting and maybe even concerning. We're just going to have to see how this movie plays out. But it's kind of the part in the movie where the downtrodden populist either has to rise up for themselves, or maybe we're far enough along in the story where it's too late to do that. I personally don't think so, but I think we're hurtling very quickly to that binary point, which is the populace is going to grab its pitchforks and torches, hopefully metaphorically, and start really, holding authorities accountable. Or we enter into a kind of a new modern, feudalist era, which I certainly hope we don't sleepwalk our way into.
A question that I have for you is more about the stock market. I know you worked on Wall Street, and when we look at the Great Depression, and a lot of people believe that we will see something worse than the Great Depression. I happen to be one of those because I look at historically, we walk ourselves right into the same mistakes, and maybe they're not mistakes, but I think what it is, it's just it's power. And so as you had just described, what happens is the system is built around the haves and the have-nots now, but there was a period of time where we had middle class, and then the middle class,
part of the strength of America.
But not to interject, Mike, can we get at least some kind of a general definition on what are we calling middle class? Is that too stupid of a question to ask?
No,
I mean, because I could come up with one of my own, but I'll bet you it's not the same definition for everybody's definition isn't going to be the same, and it might move.
I think what we're probably talking about here, at least, let's say this for me as I talk about the middle class, is I think sort of the spirit of the term, right? Which is the ability to live a middle class lifestyle, meaning like, I can afford a home, I can send my kids to college without going unduly into hawk. I can take a couple of vacations a year and afford to do so. At some point in my life, maybe in my mid to late 60s, 70s, I can think about retiring, right? I think it's those things. It's not, I can't define it necessarily by an income range or a net worth range. I mean, we can pull numbers or whatever, but I think for most people, it's the ability to kind of live that lifestyle. It's not opulence, right? But it's just like, I can get by without feeling like I'm in financial survival mode all the time.
Yeah, to me, I think part of it, and I'm pretty old, I remember America was a different place when I was 10 years old than it is now. That is for certain. But to me, there's an element of it of feeling like you have a stake in the country, culturally, financially, all of those things. Not just a level of prosperity, quantitatively marked to $2, but feeling like you could be lower class and have that there's something to having a stake in our culture that to me is very definitionally middle class. If you don't feel like you have that, then you feel like you're shorted, you got the wrong side of the coin, what have you. And I feel like I know a lot of people who would fit the definition of quote unquote middle class from a quantitative standpoint, but they don't feel like they have a stake in the country.
Well, I think the middle class is to be the bulk of the populace because that's what's driving the country from an economic standpoint.
But
That's the buyer of the GDP. What happens is the government comes in, and so does corporate America, and they beat on the middle class, and they take from the middle class to support the initiatives for the lower class. And this is fine so long as it's not outweighed. When the lower class becomes the larger populace, you have a real problem because the elite's not paying the bills. They have all the loopholes that they avoid taxation and that they have the favor of gaining the money supply or the fiat currency supply. And they actually put those dollars into their bank accounts and their pockets and by destroying this middle class, we're really throwing things off. It happened before.
What's the current figure on times annual income for the median price of a home? Is it 7, 8 now?
Yeah, it's up in that range. I actually have that in the chart, which I'll pull up at some point.
So like,
it's in that area.
10 years ago, it was in the 4s maybe?
3 to 4.
I mean, I would say from that metric alone, the middle class is a lot wiped out.
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to say this, trying to do this from memory, but I think if you are a 25-year-old looking to buy a house right now, it's something like, or maybe late 20s, 30. It's something like 7 times median income. A generation ago, so that person's parents' generation, I think it was like 4. And then a generation before that, it was 2 to 3. Mm-hmm. So it's been progressively getting harder and harder to afford the roof over your head. And Cliff, again, to sort of the spirit of your point there, which I largely agree with, although I really would hope that feeling a sense of a stake in the system isn't limited to the middle class. In a well-run country, you'd want your whole populace to feel in some way, shape, or form they've got a stake. But I think I think the middle class is, at least the way we all think of it, is, look, if I do what I'm supposed to, right? If I work hard in the system, I work hard, I show up to work, I do my job well, I save, then I should be able to get entry into this type of lifestyle. And that brass ring has been getting further and further away from more and more people at this point in time. And to your point, it leaves them feeling with this sense of betrayal and that, like, I don't have a stake in the system anymore.
Right.
The system actually isn't working for me. It's actually working against me. It's taking from me, but not giving me anything.
Just to clarify, what I really meant to say was that feeling like you have a stake in the country and the culture would be a requisite part of truly feeling middle class.
Completely.
Not that people on the lower and the upper don't, because I know plenty on both ends of that spectrum who, love this country.
Adam, what do you think that are who benefits from knocking out the middle class?
That's, and this is why I don't, really ascribe to the cabal of secret people planning the world takeover. And I know that, I've heard all the stories about, look, the Davos crowd and the WEF, you'll own nothing and be happy and all that stuff, right? And I'm not saying there aren't some people maybe with a grand vision that may be misguided. But I think, unfortunately, it's human nature, right? Which is we are all about maximizing our own individual gain. And so as you have the parties that gain the advantage and they keep increasing their advantage by their influence, lobbying Capitol Hill and, getting rules and regulations continue to write in their favor and whatnot. They're doing it with a relatively short-term mindset of how do I get better tomorrow than today, right? And I think that's what's driving it. The problem is it's short-sighted, right? You get to a point, and history is replete with this, right? You get to a point where you've taken so much from the majority, where the majority finally says, wait a minute, there's a lot more of us than there are of you, and we're pretty damn unhappy right now. And it's not in the long-term interests of the ruling elite, or whatever you want to call them, the top 10%, the top 1%, or whatever. But I don't think that they can kind of control themselves because, like I said, it's not an organized cabal. It's just a whole bunch of different parties that are just asking themselves when they wake up in the morning, how do I end the day better than I started today?
As far as a cabal,
You don't believe that?
well, I'm pretty grounded in the World Economic Forum, and I actually used to live in Switzerland, and I didn't miss this part in my background. I worked in banks in Switzerland for a little bit. Kind of ticks me off that they have that thing in Switzerland because I love Davos. I used to go snowboarding there. I'm like, can't y'all put that like somewhere else? But that part I could probably be sanguine and saying, they might talk a lot of crazy stuff, but that's not some grand scheme who's really controlling everything. But if you go back to 1913 and the formation of the Federal Reserve, and fast forward to 1971 when they decided, you know what, we don't need anything to back this money up anymore. Somebody with some power was making a plan to say, we're going to make a lot of money off doing some BS that in the long run most likely is not going to make a lot of sense. That's what I think. And it's taken a long time to matriculate, but you cannot run a country and a society and a global monetary system based on debt and money backed up by absolutely nothing. And it has me I'm not despondent about it, but I've known that for a long time, but it's really started to hit home a lot more. That every other time, no, I don't mean, tell me if I'm wrong, Adam, you're more of a scholar on this than I. Maybe not in Roman times, but any time in the past 500 years that a global reserve currency has collapsed and been replaced, that currency was backed up by some type of hard asset. I believe this is totally uncharted territory, that this has never happened before.
Yeah, and we've certainly never had a fiat world the way that we have right now, right? Where there's, in the past, past generations, there was always a more sanely managed currency that you could go hide into if your country was, overly debasing its own. Now everybody's guilty of the same thing, right? Which is why so many probably viewers of this channel have flocked into hard assets, be it real estate or gold or Bitcoin.
And I'm sorry, I know I interrupted you.
No, the point I was going to make, which I'm probably just going to pour some fuel on your fire, is I interviewed
You've interviewed everybody, Adam.
Not everybody, but I interviewed the former CEO of the Kansas City Federal Reserve. This is Thomas Honig. And
I watched.
You watched that one?
Well, if you've only interviewed him once, yes, I've watched.
I've only interviewed him once. So
okay.
you probably remember where at the very end I asked him. I said, "Look, everything that we've been discussing, Dr. Honig has, really ended up in manifesting in a decrease in purchasing power of the dollar, and everybody else is guilty of the same thing." And, I said, as you look to the future, what do you see? And he basically said, that's just going to accelerate. Like, that's the thing he's most confident in the way the system is currently being run, which is that the purchasing value of our global fiat currencies, including the dollar, is going to sort of asymptotically decrease at a faster accelerating rate. And to me, that is what I feared. So I wasn't shocked at the answer, but I was very depressed because, we always hope that there's somebody steering the ship at some high level of authority that has a better plan. It surely can't be that bad, right? And for a guy who was actually in the room to say, "Oh no, like that's," unless we really change our ways in ways that we are not doing.
I've said similar to that sentiment. I've said this similar thing to friends over time, that when you're younger, you tend to think, "Oh, well, there's older people figuring stuff out. There's other people that know what they're doing," right? Like somebody's in charge of that. And then you move through life and you're like, well, all right, wait a minute. Half the people now are younger than I am. Now who's steering this ship now? And then you realize there might not be somebody who's real daggone skilled, knowledgeable, or righteous, moral, steering the ship. And that's the way I'm feeling right now. I mean, I look at, you turn on the news, I know that's a bad thing to do. You look at politics now, and you get used to looking at it. But when you get on there and watch the guy who's the president now, and I swear I'm not bringing up politics, it is shocking. It is absolutely, you're like, wait a minute, is this real? No, this is real. And it blows my mind. It really does. Well, you get used to it. You get used to it. I'll admit it.
Well, you get obviously more jaded, understandably, as you age here and see more and more of this, right? But like, I mean, even like, there's a great quote from the comedian Lily Tomlin, where she said, I'm paraphrasing it, but she's like, "As jaded as I get, I just can't keep up with them." Right? Mm-hmm. Like, no matter how pessimistic you get, they keep coming up with ways that make you even more pessimistic. But bringing back to hunting for a second, one of the reasons why I think that was such a valuable interview was one that you're hearing all this from a guy who literally sat at the power center, right? The FOMC there at the Fed, right? Where the decisions were made. But when I asked direct questions of him, like, so what kind of track record, do you think the Fed has of actually delivering, on its mission of being a force for good in the world? He was like, not very good.
Abysmal. Yeah.
He was like, I'm not sure the Fed is a net good for society. This is a guy who's been on it, right? So it's enough to really, if you had any fumes of faith left that like, oh, there's a better, higher order of people making decisions and we just don't have visibility into it, but they're doing a good job. Stuff like that just puts a dagger.
I don't think most people, and this isn't making a judgment on I'm smart and other people aren't. I don't think most people, Adam and Todd, have any clue of the numbers and the magnitude of the numbers underlying this system that is literally teeter-tottering on the edge of a cliff.
Well, I think people were learning it very quickly because their bank accounts are empty. They're in debt. They're now not paying their mortgage payments. FHA is now increased to 11% delinquency. And Fannie Mae is selling non-performing and reperforming loans already. We're seeing, banks really struggling now with all of the toxic commercial debt on their books. We're seeing commercial real estate assets being sold now for literally,
I send you some
98%,
right? Don't I send you stories on occasion?
Discount.
Adam,
go ahead, Adam.
10%. I'm talking like trophy properties in DC, in Baltimore. 10% of what they sold for 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, and we're seeing delinquencies and other types of consumer debt, auto loans, credit card debt delinquencies are back up at like 2010, I think, rates right now.
The news that, to me, that I think that's come up in the past month that I think could really be, what's the right word? Could be ginormous is that bit about Fannie and Freddie possibly getting into HELOCs. I'm telling you, that could blow up the whole rooster pen.
It was such a bad idea the first time around. Why not do it again?
But you talk about coming up with ideas to kick the can down the road. Yeah. That is a phenomenal one.
Yeah. Well,
we're not getting into that?
No, not yet. No, we're going to talk about it tonight, but we're not going to talk about it.
The middle class is going to be involved in that.
Right.
Anyway.
Hey, Tom, Tom, real quick, if I can, just because I think it's going to be useful to the conversation, let me just give a little bit of context, because I get asked all the time by people who say, hey, why are so many of your guests focused on, these things that are wrong or could go wrong. Like, if we just look at the numbers, everything's great, right? We're going to have 3.6% GDP growth in Q2. At least that's what it's estimated right now from GDP Now. We got unemployment still below 4%. We got inflation. Yeah, it's a little sticky, but it's in the threes, and the Fed's bringing it down, right? Like, stock markets are all back at all-time highs, right? So, people hear that and they say, like, what are you guys talking about? Like, things are great, right? And I think you really have to understand the difference between mean and median. So if I can bring you back to your high school algebra days, the mean is an average, right? The median is where the 50th percentile person is. It's the middle of the data distribution set, right? And so I think we're at the point right now where the lag effect, which you guys have even watched one of my videos, you've heard me talk about it. I talk about it all the time. But like the impact of the higher rates, that the Fed has put on the system, the impact of taking out a lot of or at least the incredible liquidity that got shoved into the system. There's still a ton, and there's still a lot they're putting in. But we finally drained through the excess savings that consumers had that they were given with the direct consumer payments and all that stuff. There's a lot that's been propping up the system that's beginning to come out, and the gravitational force of those high rates are now really beginning to weigh more and more on the system, both on corporations, but certainly we're seeing on consumers. The challenge is that the parts of the system that are doing well, right? The companies that are very well positioned, right? Let's take the Magnificent Seven, right? They're pulling the whole market along with it, right? So if you look at the average profitability of the markets, it's great, right? But it's these massively successful companies that are masking the fact that, like so many more of the S&P 493, other companies aren't doing that great. Their profits aren't great. Most of the Russell 2000 isn't even making a profit right now. Same thing on the consumer side, where because the financial markets have done so well, the people who own financial assets, which is way disproportionately the top 10%, they own 93% of all financial assets. They're doing great, right? Their portfolios have gone through the roof. Plus, they're getting paid over 5%, in any treasury debt that they hold, right? So, like, they're literally doing great. Whereas the bottom 90% is really increasingly struggling. The problem is if you just look at the average or the mean, everything still looks pretty fine. You have to look at the median. You have to look at the middle of the distribution. If you look at the median corporation or the median person, you'll see that they're not doing well at all, and that they're increasingly being left behind. So a big part of this is knowing where to look, what type of data to look at. Because if you just look at averages, it's not going to tell you the whole picture.
Adam, you had said that a lot of your viewers, and mine as well, look at the guests that come on, or the topics that we're talking about, the narrative that we're trying to really expose, right? What do you think they were saying in the Roaring '20s? Do you think that they were predicting that there would be a massive depression and a stock market crash? Do you think during the Roaring '20s they were thinking that?
No, that was like I don't want to say the original FOMO, because that was like the South Sea bubble and Dutch tulip craze, but it was probably definitely the original, the OG American FOMO, right? Which was everybody just thought things were great and they were only getting better, right? And of course everybody levered up and took way too much risk and didn't plan for tomorrow. And I think we've talked about this analogy. This is why I hold, more than anybody, it's our policymakers. I hold their feet to the fire as being the real culpable parties here, because what they've done, is they've intervened so grotesquely, both pre and post COVID, that they have manufactured this environment that looked far more stable and prosperous than it actually was, right? It was basically, hollowing out tomorrow's prospects by pulling tomorrow's prosperity into today and deforming the system. And I think you and I talked about this, right? I kind of analogize that to ice, right? Where, certainly that for a long time, they were pushing people, when we had ZIRP, the era of ZIRP, they were pushing people way out on the risk curve, right? And people were getting pushed out into thinner and thinner ice. But because the ice persisted for so long, didn't break, people started forgetting to worry, and they started to treat the ice with the confidence that it was concrete, right? And then when times get going really heavy, people really start partying hard, not realizing how thin the ice is. Then of course what happens is the ice breaks, everybody's totally caught by surprise at the exact wrong time when they're way too exposed to risk. And that's when the maximum damage happens. And sadly, the worst of the damage happens to the parties that can least afford to take it. And I think that's what happened in the late 20s. And that's what's, I think, at risk of happening here.
I would, your comment about looking at the
Mean in the median?
At the mean, and you have me thinking, you know what the mode is, right? Mean, median, and mode, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like third grade. But yes, I totally agree. You got to look at the average. The outliers can make the majority of the people look like everything's totally different than what it is. But to your point, and I know we're supposed to be interviewing you, without deficit spending, a lot of those numbers are a completely different shade.
Absolutely. That's the grotesque distortion I was just talking about. Exactly.
I mean, it's like, okay, we have a GDP based on what? A bunch of money that you just printed that's not real, that you don't have. And a second thing that it made me think was, okay, people are doing really the 9% that own the assets, who are making money off of all of this being financialized. They are making their returns in a currency that is being rapidly debased. So even that is not, in gold terms or in international terms, what it looks like in a USA vacuum.
True, although I'd say it looks much worse in gold terms or Bitcoin or any hard asset than it does in a Forex side, only because so many other parties are doing the same thing that we are.
Yes, but yeah. That I think we're due for. I just can't wait to see what happens at the BRICS meeting in October. I mean, it's like, it's better than waiting for the Super Bowl or Christmas. What is going to go down at that meeting?
Well, so two things. One, I'd be curious to see what happens there too. And I was just talking with Michael Every, who is he's a chief strategist for Rabobank, but he's a Brit. He's based out in Singapore, and I really like talking to Michael because he looks at all this from a non-U.S. perspective. So many of the other experts we talk to are located here in the U.S. He looks at our system from the outside, and he does say, look, if you talk to, if you go to Europe, you go to Abu Dhabi, you go to Asia or whatever, like de-dollarization, it's just something that's been been talked about for a long time, and it's getting talked about a lot more. Where it's still in the West, kind of treated as a little bit of a tinfoil hat, topic. So he's like, look, it like it or not, that train is definitely has left the station. It's building up steam. That being said, he said, look, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and I've certainly heard this from many other people too. It's probably going to be, a slow grind down. It's not like we're going to wake up tomorrow. It's highly unlikely we're going to wake up tomorrow and hear that the U.S. dollar has been, supplanted as the world reserve currency, and all these countries aren't taking it anymore. It's actually quite a challenging thing to replace the dollar as the world reserve currency. And if you've listened to Brent Johnson and his whole dollar milkshake theory, he does a much better job of enumerating all the reasons why. And Brent, funnily enough, is not a dollar bull. He just tries to see himself as a dollar realist. So this is my way of trying to tell people, like, look, don't panic and go run and like literally sell all your dollars tomorrow because you think they're going to become worthless overnight. Because I know people who did that 10 years ago for these same concerns.
Maybe you did ask him this. What would Honig say? I'm definitely more on the accelerated end in mind now. I've studied it. I've watched probably everything Brett Johnson's podcasted for the past couple years, and you might have a straw and you're getting more of the liquid than somebody else, but you might be drinking worthless sewage water. So it doesn't really matter how much is coming up the straw when it's not worth anything.
I think we're missing the point completely. I don't even think it's a matter of whether the devaluing the dollar. I think Americans are broke. I think that we're missing the whole mark here. People can't afford to live. They can't afford their home. When you can't afford a roof over your head, that's a problem. And when we're looking at, even going through the great financial crisis, and you all have heard me say it before, we never, breach the unaffordability that we're in today. We could still, even in the height of 2006 nationwide, the average median income earners could afford the average median priced home. Once we've taken that out of the equation, now we're determining which bills to pay. Our debt crisis is going through the roof. I tell you what, when America stops spending money, that's when the problem shows up, because then you can import all the junk you want, that doesn't work, that breaks, and that we have to buy over again and pay top dollar for it. That's all going to go away because people can't afford to do it. Now the government has a choice. They can either continue to bail out and pay for everybody. Look, we're going to talk about how the student loan bailout. How we're 30. The average borrower or student debtor is getting on average $35,000 in bailout of their student debt. All right. Once we take away the fact that the government can't continue to print money into even a larger deficit, that we need hyperinflation to get ourselves out of this, Americans, they're tapped out.
So I just want to say, Todd, I agree with you. I think this is the biggest story of what we'll call the middle of the 2020s here, which is right now we have a large and fast growing percentage of the population that is teetering on that cliff of being able to provide for themselves and feel like they are in control of their financial destiny, versus those that feel like they've fallen off and they're now basically,
our population decline, Adam. How about that? How about the fact that people can't even have kids because they can't afford it?
Yeah, exactly.
One income used to be enough. Now you can't do it on two incomes, and they're going to spend $1,000 a week on infant daycare or more, $2,000, depending on where you live in the country. Who can afford that? And now we're wondering, geez, why are we having a population decline? And, why is it that we need to, have an influx like never before of immigration in order to keep our GDP growing? Hello? People can't afford to have babies.
So hugely important point. I think that rooster, comes home to those chickens come home to roost, kind of in the mid 2030s and a little bit later. But it's phenomenally important because that's a national security issue, right? That's like, are we going to be able to actually continue to run our economy on the current economic model? And we can't if our working population age falls below a certain growth rate, and it's in high degree of danger of that. And when we talk about this, it's hard not to get into the topic of immigration, both legal and illegal, because that's how you make up the gap. And that's a highly charged conversation. I don't know if we want to necessarily go into there at this point yet. In fact, I'd say let's not yet, at least, because there's so much to talk about on the key point that you mentioned, Todd, which is hey, in the here and now, everybody is, or not everybody, but more and more people are beginning to say, look, I'm beginning to lie awake at night wondering if I'm going to make it. And I've got a bunch of stats here I want to walk us through in just a moment. But let me say in as nonpartisan a way as I can, the election, I think, is going to really bring this to the forefront in a way that it hasn't been brought yet. And what's interesting is I still see some of these articles in the media where people are trying to say, America, so many Americans are saying that we're in a recession right now, but they're wrong. Or, things are better than people are saying, how they feel. And I think that these are either paid opinion pieces or just extremely obtuse journalists who just don't get it. I think, to my earlier point, they're kind of looking at the average, not realizing that it's getting pulled up by the hyper affluent, and that the vast majority of folks, their real lived reality is one of increasing desperation.
A lot of big, mainstream media are they're political arms, so they're gonna say what somebody tells them to say.
Sure, and big ones. They're advertising supported, so they're waiting for those big ad dollars to start. And
then they have the colossal slip ups, like when they brought what's his name, Jared Bernstein on, and Do you know what I'm talking?
Yeah.
I mean, anyway.
And for folks that didn't see that, this is what he was the head of the Presidential Economic Council, or whatever, and couldn't even describe how.
He is the chief economic advisor of Joseph Biden.
Okay, yeah.
Chief. That's what I heard.
So-
Am I overstating it? Did he have absolutely zero concept of what quantitative easing was?
Yeah. Well, more importantly, it was how money's made. Just how money is created.
None.
It was none, and it was embarrassing because he caught himself in the middle of the interview saying, "You know what? I really don't understand this." But where I'm going with this is, look, when it comes to elections in general, people vote their pocketbooks, right? I mean, there's other issues that are important to them, and some elections, one or two of them different ones will kind of rise to the top three, but always in the top three is, how am I doing economically, financially? And in periods like now, it becomes a supreme importance for voters. And the key question that you get asked, right, is, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And the answer of that for I think the vast majority of people financially is no. And I think that is a massive handicap for the current administration coming into this election. Again, I don't want to make this partisan, but I'm just saying if the current administration wants to get reelected, it has to find some way to demonstrate to voters. There's not much it's going to be able to do between now and November. So
how about $35,000 a pop in student loan forgiveness? That'll get you
$4.5 million.
That'll get you a couple votes.
Yeah, well, and that's why they're and not only are the efforts that we hear about, right, that the administration has been doing to try to get increasing amount of loans forgiven, but there's stealth stuff going on that's not even making the headlines. I got contacted by one of my followers like 2 weeks ago who said, I had 2 student loans, one of which I just recently paid off, and I wish I hadn't, because like a week after I paid it off, I was told that my other loan balance was forgiven. And he said, I didn't even apply for it. He said, like, I didn't even know it could even have been forgiven, but I got a notice, basically in the mail saying, hey, don't worry about it, it's been taken care of. So, there obviously are things like that going on, which are hard to see as much else than vote buying. But, that in and of itself, I don't think is going to turn the tide with the level of increasing pain that we're hearing from these folks. I've got a ton of data. I'll let you guys ask questions, but just one thing I want to pull up here, because we mentioned it earlier, and I'm going to try to do this live, which is always the worst thing to do. But let's see here. No, I'll let you guys talk, and I'll try to bring it up if I can find it. But I was going to bring up the home price to average household income ratio, just so we could see how badly it is, right? And look, it all starts there, right? When people start realizing that, they're not going to be able to afford a roof over their head, or that they're going to be a rent serf for the rest of their lives, even though they're doing everything well, everything sort of falls downhill from there.
Adam, do you think that we will get back to, well, first of all, I don't believe the inflation numbers. Do you?
I don't. And the hitch you hear in my voice is, look, I've never believed, I've always thought the government numbers were much rosier than they were, right? The real cost of living that folks have absorbed way more than what I think. I mean, it's bad if you just look at it with the BLS's numbers, that I think it's something like 20 to 25% cost of living increase since the beginning of 2020.
And that's Bureau of Labor and Statistics, just for people to
But also, even if you just, I don't know the granularity of it, Adam, you probably do, but they change what goes into the calculation. So even if you dissect the definition, they are materially different than comparing them to what they were decades ago, and people have no idea. And it's all obfuscation, and I hate to sound like a doomsdayer type thing, but it's so opaque that it is not, I don't believe there is any intended purpose to be clarifying to the mass populace.
So the question, Adam, is, do you think we're going to experience higher inflation?
So it all depends on your timeline. So
in the next 18 months.
So inflation is, amongst the experts that I interview, I would say the topic of inflation is the one that I have the greatest amount of disparity on in terms of what I hear from the folks I interview. And I'd say roughly half of them think we're in a higher secular inflation era going forward. And certainly, things like reshoring and onshoring and stuff like that, that's supportive of that, right? Supportive of higher wages. The other cohort says, look, I think that the lag effect is going to be catching up with us, and that is going to be disinflationary, probably deflationary for a period of time. And so that will bring CPI and inflation down. Now, let me tell you my best guesstimate, which is just one guy's opinion, so nobody, bet your future on this, which is I think they're pretty much going to do everything they can to hold it together until the election. And I've got this thesis, which is I think that both candidates for president have a vested interest in letting a correction happen after the election. So, let's say Biden, wins again, right? He knows that they've been doing absolutely everything they can to keep this corpse animated, till the election. And he knows that you can't do that forever. So he would say, look, let's let the froth leave after the election. Yeah, it's going to hurt for a bit, but it's going to lower the bar for me, and it's going to get rid of the unsustainable, as much of the unsustainable stuff as I can. And then I'll, let the dust settle in my second year, and I'll finish strong in year 3 and 4, right? Now, if Trump wins, Biden administration is obviously going to stop doing whatever they're doing. And Trump has an incentive to say, yeah, let it clear. Like, get the bar as low as possible. I get to blame it on Biden for my first 2 years, and then I can end strong in years 3 and 4, right? So I personally think that coming into the end of the year, beginning of next year, I'm a big proponent of the lag effect, like I talked about. I also think that the leaders have an interest in letting things clear. So I think we're going to see disinflation, probably recession. I mean, I just don't see. We talk about the CPI numbers not being believable. I don't believe the jobs numbers. I think those things are more cooked than probably any any data series out there right now. And I think if we get into a real recession with real job loss, in the hundreds of thousands of jobs per month, if we've seen in previous ones, I think that it's going to be really hard for inflation to stay where it is. Then, and this is my big asterisk, then I think once we're in recession, just like we have seen the playbook over the past couple of times where we've fallen into the bust part of the business cycle, the central authorities are going to come in. And now that COVID really cracked open their playbook, they have a lot more tools and magnitude available to them than they ever imagined beforehand. We're going to see massive rescue response from the policymakers. And I think that is going to be highly inflationary. So to answer your question, Todd, I think inflation is going to be sticky through the election. I think then we're going to disinflate, deflate as we get a recession, or at least a big, froth correction. And then once the central planners step in, I think it's going to be inflation to the moon, or as Michael Pinto says, stagflation unlike we have ever seen in this country.
We created more debt during the pandemic era that, in my opinion, we will now realize wasn't necessary.
Sure.
Especially when we're now seeing the investigations into fraud.
Yeah,
and
crazy fraud of the PPP loans in and of itself was monumentally criminal. Yeah,
and that was huge money. And then the bailouts that we've done. So here's what I kind of think is the story plays out. And I don't disagree with you. I think that what we can't have is in this economy is deflation. I think at best stagflation would be what the government would hope for. If we see deflation, especially again in the housing market, which I believe we will see, we are seeing it. We are now seeing sellers waking up to the fact, I'm going to say it, sellers, if you haven't sold yet, in my opinion, you missed the ship for getting your highest price that you could get. If you haven't done it by now we're seeing a halt. We are seeing the biggest halt that we've seen since the GFC right here in the Maryland area. I'm talking to loan officers. They are dead. I mean, they have no business. And
So, sorry, when you say halt, do you mean in transaction volume?
transactions are halted. I mean, we still are seeing things sell, but not to the level to keep things moving, not to the level to not see price reductions. These sellers are now saying, you know what, my house hasn't sold in a week. What do? You drop the price. That's what you do,
Yep.
right? So if they're not selling it within a week, they're in trouble as far as getting the price that they hope for. But my point is, we can't handle deflation at this point in time because the businesses can't sustain it. What we learned from stimulus is that it doesn't work. We burn through the stimulus. If you go to the businesses that utilize that money, a lot of them bought the wrong products. They were gluttonous. They bought, inventory that they now can't sell. They didn't realize. I mean, look, we thought that flex space was going to be the number one type of real estate move.
Right.
Rent a warehouse. You'll be a distributor for Amazon. When we start seeing them close distribution centers and the layoffs that we're now seeing, we're not even prepared. We were like, we thought this was this was going to continue. Everybody had more money in their pockets and we're spending money doing our home improvement projects. Guess what, guys? That's not practical. That's not real life. Now we're in debt. So now, no matter what happens, what I believe is we're going to go through a major, major downturn. And I think what's going to happen is it doesn't matter what they do. How can they stimulate, their way through, out of
When you
this?
say can't handle deflation, and I heard then you start talking about housing prices. You talking
The banks will completely, if you talk about deflation, we're talking about businesses going under on massive scale, massive unemployment, like Adam said. We're going to see businesses closing their door left and right. Rents are not going to be paid back on these commercial buildings. 70% of banks' balance sheets are in commercial real estate holdings, right? We're going to have to see the biggest stimulus package that we've ever seen, bigger than what we just witnessed 4 years ago. Bigger, the most money printing than we have in 200 years. We know what that's done to our debt.
And I'm really
society.
being curious, asking this question. Am I getting from what you're saying that you think the residential housing prices not correcting down would be more healthy than?
No, what I'm saying is that when residential housing crashes, people
And you're
give
counting
up,
that as deflation.
They stop paying their mortgage.
Yeah.
When you're going through a period of time, we are not scholars of history at all. We look at the history books. Look, we're not taking a look back. If we look back at the Great Depression and what fueled it, the stock market had never been higher leading up to the Great Depression. The stock market right now has never been higher. What is trading in these stock prices, the multiples that these stocks are trading to actual income of these companies, they're having a field day. And you want to say, look, you want to say insider trading doesn't happen, or it may be illegal, but only some actually are accused of it. If you don't think that they know that if you're in business and your stocks are trading at numbers that you could never fulfill financially based on the products that you produce or the people to buy it, aren't you wondering how long this scheme will last?
Aside from software, Adam, how many of the Magnificent Seven make a hard product? Tesla and who else? I don't think any.
It depends what you call a hard product, but yeah, NVIDIA makes it cheap.
Well,
right?
okay, I'm not going to count them as a hard. And maybe you should, but it's not traditional. What I think of is, it's very put NVIDIA with Tesla. Are all the other ones service economies? I don't know. You wouldn't call software part of the services economy.
Yeah, pretty
it's very.
To the point of what you're saying, yes, these are intangible goods. They're not.
You were in Silicon Valley during the 2000, right?
I was.
So was I.
Were you? So you probably remember, with Todd, kind of the picture Todd's painting here. If we get.
Well, I remember how I said I think we're getting ready to live through a part of history. I really, literally felt like, wait a minute, I'm living through something really big right now, And it was wild times out there. I worked for.
I wonder if you have the same experience I did, where so I lived in Silicon Valley, and so you take 101 to get to work, right? And it would take you forever to get a mile. You just
I remember. Yeah.
And then
Which side though of the were you on the ocean? Were you on the the Milpitas side? I had jobs where I took both those sides down towards Silicon Valley.
Okay, yeah.
And the ocean side was worse.
It was worse, yeah. Especially
I used to go from Pacifica to right downtown San Jose.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. All right. So most of my time I was going from Los Gatos over to Santa Clara.
Oh, that's not much of a commute.
Not distance-wise.
No, right.
Yeah,
I love Santa Clara. Excuse me, Los Gatos. That was a great place.
That's a great place to be from. But
means the cats. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But it would take me like 45 minutes to an hour to make that drive during, the commute hours. And then I think in March, it took me 45 minutes to an hour to make that commute. In April,
Todd, it was crazy.
It took me 15 minutes. It was literally like a neutron bomb had gone off, where all the infrastructure still existed, but all the people were gone, right? You were just like, oh my God, what?
It was euphoric before that, though, wasn't it?
Oh, it's crazy before
No,
that.
I don't.
Let's get to the point.
Exactly. Nothing. That was give me a demerit. Sorry. We'll talk about it more later, Adam.
Yeah, but anyways, to Todd's point though, we could very well have a reckoning like that coming. In fact, I think it's increasingly hard to not have that concern that we are getting there. And to Todd's point, Todd, what I hear you saying is, hey, we're probably going to get disinflation and deflation, at least for a period of time, because that's what the system wants to do. I mean, if we just stop meddling around and just let natural market forces take over, man, we would deflate in a heartbeat, right? So, but to Todd's point, our system as it's currently constructed cannot tolerate deflation. I mean, it's a debt-based monetary system, and
it's leveraged. Yeah,
so freaking huge that a recession is going to crater our tax income receipts, and yet the debt still exists. These as long as interest rates are this high, we're paying a gargantuan amount of our deficit now just to pay the interest on the national debt. And if our tax receipts go down, then our deficits are going to have to get even bigger, right? Or God forbid, we're going to have to do less as a government, which our current cohort of politicians has no idea how to do. All they know how to do is to distribute an ever-growing pie.
When I hear, bubbles need to pop. That's a healthy thing, and that's right. That is a speck of inflation, and
I think that they shouldn't be manipulated in the first place. I think the bubbles would pop naturally if we wouldn't be kicking the can down
for
the road.
a bubble to pop, you're going to have deflation, at least in that sector.
And the problem is that this really is a two-edged thing, or a two-sided thing. There's no sitting politician that is ever going to advocate deflation or advocate austerity, because they just know it's political suicide. And sadly, the populace doesn't want to hear it. The populace, we keep electing people who are just promising us that everything's going to be better, or that they're going to give us something today and we'll figure it out tomorrow, right? So, we have human nature really working against us here. One, because the people who are in power will never do this on their own, but we are not demanding it of them as a populace. So, what do? We all cheer.
I think what if someone's asked me, Cliff, what do you think the populace should do? I think we need to demand and elect people that will make us take our tough medicine. People don't want that.
Absolutely. But let me ask you this, Cliff. So let's say a recession arrives, end of this year. What's the first thing you think the citizens are going to ask for?
Helicopter money.
More direct checks.
Not just stimulus. They're going to want those checks because now, like you said, it opened up their playbook. When they did those stimulus, all that varied stimulus, to me, it reminded me of an entitlement program. They never go away.
Right? Let's ask this question here. DW says, using wage increases to fight inflation and Keynesian, thank you, policies is causing stagflation. Do you agree?
Can you read it one more time?
I think there's a better way to in all respect to DW, maybe there's a better way to ask this question. So I guess when he says wage increases to fight inflation, he's saying that, okay, workers are saying cost of living's gone up. I need a higher wage to work for you. But you really got to get to why is inflation coming up. So wage increases themselves are not causing stagflation. Stagflation is basically when you have an increase in cost of living, but a decrease in economic growth, right? So I don't think the wage increase themselves is a way to is what's causing stagflation itself. I think it's the fact that we have taken on an incredible amount of debt into the system that we didn't need to take on at that magnitude, as Todd was saying earlier. That is increasingly weighing on the economy with interest rates as high as they are, right? And because of the massive amounts of ridiculous liquidity that got pumped into the system during COVID and continues to get pumped in now, that has created the rise in the cost of living, which has then caused workers to demand higher wages, which then increases the cost structure of businesses and kind of creates that vicious cycle. So I think the wage increases are an exacerbator, but I see them as more of a symptom, not a cause.
We're still not seeing wages grow to what is necessary for today's prices. Yeah. I mean, if anything, wage growth has gone down.
Well, 60% of workers say that wages have not kept up with inflation. So we have had real positive real wage growth over the past couple of quarters, but that growth is coming down, so it is moderating. And you have to remember that these past couple quarters were preceded by something like 2 years of 24 plus months of negative real wage growth. So we haven't climbed out of that hole that was dug over the past several years.
Adam, when we went through the crisis, the pandemic, we had a shortage of workers because of the amount of business that was transacting. And I experienced it myself, where we had construction workers that were, demanding $3, $4, $5 more an hour, or they were gone tomorrow. Right. Because what was happening was other employers were saying, look, we need people. We'll pay you bonuses, sign-on bonuses. I mean, look what was happening. They were giving sign-on bonuses to people to stay, or not sign-on bonuses, but they were giving bonuses to employees for staying and not leaving and going to work somewhere else.
Yeah,
so now that everything is retracting and that businesses are slowing down, what's the first thing they're going to look to cut?
Well, so this is a really key point, right? So what we've done is, what caused all that, Todd, right? What caused all that was policy, right? We shut down the economy.
Too much stimulus is what money put.
Before the stimulus, we shut down the economy, right? So companies
we shut down the jobs. I don't know that we did have stay-at-home orders, but people were using their keyboards to order. They were still buying.
But my point is because we shut down the economy, companies had to lay off people in droves. Right? Remember, we had tens of millions of people like quickly unemployed, right? Then we sent all the stimulus out there, which made staying at home doing nothing more attractive, right? And it started goosing asset prices. So your older workers who had assets said, I can retire early, right? And then businesses got caught flat-footed, right? And it was a lot harder to bring these people back. So they had to pay those retention bonuses. They had to pay up to get people come back. Generals always fight the last war. So companies have been labor hoarding for the past several years, right? I don't want to let these people go because I'm remembering how hard it was to get them back, right? Now we're getting to the point where they're saying, you know what? My fear of having to hire this person back is now getting lower than my fear of my loss of corporate profits, right? And when we hit that inflection point, when corporate America says, I'm shifting from net retaining employees too long to now net getting rid of them, maybe a little too fast, you're going to see a watershed of layoffs at that point in time. And that's one of the things that I watch really closely. I think in this story, probably the number one thing I'd look at, if I could only look at one thing, is liquidity. And that's a little bit of a squishy thing. Different people, measure it differently. But I think that indicator probably punches above its weight more than any other. Right behind it is unemployment. And so I look at the employment data really closely. And I said earlier, I think it's some of the most doctored, at least the government data is some of the most doctored data out there. So it's hard to get a really good look at it. But once that domino falls, once unemployment really starts taking off, that is the last bulwark against recession here. And so I think when that goes, it's going to be Katie bar the door.
I have a question for you, Adam. Is working from home productive for companies?
I'm mixed on it, and I'll be really honest. I left my corporate America job in 2010 to found a company that sort of is the predecessor of what I do now, right? And I was ferociously more productive working from home with this new company as a sort of a solopreneur. I had a business partner at that point in time. I wasn't trapped in endless meetings. I wasn't trapped in those long commutes on 101 Cliff. And so, if you don't have to be in the office surrounded by coworkers to do your job, you can actually be really productive from home, remote. I was in the mindset and I had the skill set to be able to really focus and do everything I needed to do remotely. I think there are a lot of workers, especially younger ones, don't have that. There's lots of benefits you get from working in teams and learning from mentors and whatnot. I think it's very highly dependent upon the type of work you do and the function that you play inside the company. So I can't paint with a broad brush and say it's good or if it's bad. I do think in general, though, it's a lot less efficient than people generally think it is. And I think we're going to see the return to work movement pick up steam from here.
I'm mixed on it also. I definitely don't think it's a one size fits all type. Some types of jobs, yes. Some types of jobs and personalities, yes, and other ones definitely not.
No, but I think as the pendulum shifts back towards the employer, which it is, right? We've seen the quits ratio moderate. So remember during the Great Resignation, everybody was flipping off their boss and saying, pay me more, I'm gone, right? That's back to traditional levels now at this point. And so, the employer is getting more and more of the power back. And I think once they start laying people off, it's going to be, look, if you want to keep your job, you got to come in the office for the vast majority of their employees.
We were just talking about commutes.
Look, as an employer, I think obviously, Adam, you're self-employed now.
Yes, sir.
So you had a drive that made you productive. Now you have your own business, right? So when you look at it, I think, and generally speaking, this has cost a lot in inflation in itself. What it takes to get a job done anymore is completely ridiculous. They're addicted to their phones. Mm-hmm. They are, a lot of people, and look, guys, you can get upset with this if you don't like hearing it from me. And if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. But I personally know where people stay in bed, until, well beyond the time that they should be working, and, take off during the day and go shopping. And I tried doing it. I hired an out-of-state, employee and, remote worker. He missed a meeting, said, he was sorry that he was walking his dog and his neighbor started talking to him and he lost track of time and he never showed up to the meeting. And every time I tried to get a hold of him, he was busy doing something other than answering my call. It didn't last very long. I fired him. And, we don't just have one problem. We have a cultural problem where, everything is kind of screwed up. And here's what I think is going to happen because, look, I've been an employer for a long time. I think what's going to happen is that companies, and this is not just mom and pop shops, this is companies in general, they're going to find a way that if you are not producing as an employee, they're going to get rid of you. I think that they're living in the sand. And most of the people that have jobs today don't even know what it was like to go through a downturn just 15 years ago. And so when you look at that, you go, okay, these people have bought houses, they have expensive $1,000 car payments, they have lifestyles where they have to buy every next thing from Instagram and TikTok, and the employer owes them a living. And guess what? It doesn't. And as soon as we start to see some kind of a dry up, it's happening now, these companies are going to be waiting to get rid of people left and right. And that alone in itself is going to cause a massive unemployment issue. And here's the thing. If a company can, and I'm talking about corporate America, can replace you with AI or a robot, and you think they won't, you got a rude awakening.
So totally agree, and that's a bit of a longer term, probably less long term than maybe most realize. But we can have a huge discussion, Todd, about the malincentive that corporate America has to get rid of employing humans, which they've been trying to do since well before COVID and all this, well before AI became super hot in the past couple of years. But AI is going to be accelerating that. So I agree with everything you said, and I just want to underscore that potential coming switch to where employers, bring the hammer down and say, you know what, we decided we're not going to talent hoard anymore. You're really going to have to prove yourself to keep your job. If you don't like it, there's the door. That in and of itself is my number one reason why I'm bearish on home prices going forward. Because I think that when we get to that stage, that is going to be the forcing function that all of a sudden a lot of people who are holding onto their homes right now, many of them,
they won't be able to keep
get into it. They lose their income and they're like, I have no other choice. I got to put it on the market.
Adam, we're in a situation, and this is as plain and simple, as black and white, as there is no gray area. This is the fact. People need to earn more income to live today and to have any kind of hope for a brighter tomorrow. If they want to save money for their college funds, for their kids, they want to own a home, they want to have a savings account, okay, they need to make more money. Unless they up their game for their employer or are in a position to where they are helping their employer not just survive, but thrive, they're going to lose their jobs. Because the ones that are not in the spirit of accelerating and doing better, they're going to be the first ones to go. And then trying to replace those jobs with what they're making now is going to be hard in the next wave or the next season that's coming.
Completely agree. And I've actually got a lot of strong opinions on this and what you can do as a worker to reduce your vulnerability of being, one of the ones that gets a pink slip unexpectedly from work if your employer starts going into layoffs, and what to do if you find yourself out there having to find another job. Rather than suck up a ton of time here talking about it, I actually went on a fairly long discussion of this in my video on Saturday, my weekly market recap with Lance Roberts. So if anybody is at that stage where you're working for a paycheck and you're feeling a little vulnerable, but you're not entirely sure what to do about it, I'd listen to the last half hour of that discussion with Lance. But I agree with everything you just said, Todd.
And I just want to add one more thing to that. So I was just talking with someone, and they were, they're house shopping, and they're looking, and they said, you know what, maybe we should not be looking for a house right now. My company just laid off a lot of employees, and this is just a couple weeks ago, okay? And they said, look, I don't know whether I'll be next or not, but my company just laid off a bunch of people. And then I was talking with her, and she said that her company just went through this hiring spree. She's like, I don't really understand it. It makes no sense. Are we like doing well or are we not doing well? And I said, what they did was they cleaned out shop. They got rid of
the old expensive
they needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they hired other people in, probably like you said, Adam, for less money.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And also, too, I think in this environment, you really have to just take nothing for granted. And a little anecdote about that is I have a neighbor who worked until recently for Rivian, right? And so Rivian electric truck company, she was hired away from Tesla to go work for Rivian, and it was, a startup at the time, and just gobs of employee benefits, and it was a fantastic place to work because they had magical money, right? Well, then Rivian went public, and I think like its second or third day of being public, it was worth more than like Toyota and GM combined market cap, even though they had like 6 trucks on the road. I mean, it was just crazy. But since then, reality has slowly been creeping in. I don't know what the stock price is now, but it's lucky to be in the teens if it is when it was at like $180 during the heydays, right? So anyways, Rivian last year started announcing a little layoff here, a little layoff there. So I'd always check up with her and be like, "How you doing okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, no, I think I'm fine." And then probably like 2-3 months ago, they announced a pretty big round of layoffs, and I called her and said, "Hey, did you survive?" She said, "Yeah, I did." And she's like, "I got really lucky. I'm now pregnant, and so I'm going on maternity leave. So I'm going to be okay for the next 6 months. I'm a little bit worried about what might happen at the end of the year when I come back, but I'm now, I'm going to be protected." Well, anyways, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to her, and she was like, "Oh my God, I didn't tell you." She's like, "I got laid off." She was like 2 days before I was going to enter the window of being protected on maternity leave, I got the pink slip from the company. And, this was something that a company really isn't going to do unless it's getting pretty desperate, because just litigation wise, there's risk there. But yeah, she thought she was protected under, the maternity clause, and turns out, she wasn't. So don't take anything for granted here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take some questions, comments. All right, reducing inflation means reducing business costs, and that starts with energy. Agree?
I generally agree with that.
Sorry, you would or you wouldn't?
I would. I think energy is pretty much the currency as much as anything else.
Yeah, the thing I'm hung up on answering this question is energy is an essential input, meaning you can't get anything done without it, right? I mean, you reduce your energy usage to zero, you reduce your production to zero.
You turn your lights off in your business and see how well it works out for you.
Yeah. So, there's probably going to be an opportunity there for energy brokers that are helping you, kind of like get the best rate for your energy, just like there are with people that are trying to help your company get the best healthcare plan. Sure, you're going to be cost conscious, but I think companies are going to be cutting fat in other departments way more before. I mean, energy it's not cutting muscle. It's almost not even cutting bone. It's like, cutting blood, something you just absolutely need. But yeah, I guess maybe companies will look at their most expensive energy expenditures and maybe see if they can bring them under control. But to Todd's earlier point, I think labor's got a way bigger target on its back than energy.
Well, look at it. When businesses, and I guess first corporate America will be the first ones that, in my opinion, that will adopt AI and robotics. That's what we're seeing, because they can afford the initial outlay to deploy something like that. But a publicly traded company, they're looking after their shareholders. And what does that mean? It means by returning profits. And if employment is the largest cost on their income statement and they start to run negative, obviously they're going to look at shutting down, consolidating, deploying technology as much as they possibly can. This is just common sense.
And also too, and this is a little weird, but so especially public companies, right? Like I think right now you will get cheered by reducing your labor cost footprint, because that pretty much goes straight to the bottom line, at least in the short term. Right. Eventually, fewer people, maybe that hurts revenues, but that takes a while to make it through the system. But right now, with the whole AI boom, right, there's a massive demand from Wall Street to invest in the energy that you're going to need to run your AI, right? And so I could almost see a company saying, oh, we're trying to reduce our energy usage to like pinch pennies, I could actually see a public company getting penalized for that, because people are saying, well, then you're going to fall behind in the AI race, right? So it's just, we live in an era right now where you get some of these weird things like that, where some forms of cost cutting get rewarded, some don't.
I have a question for you. You had said that maybe in the short run that getting rid of employees would help their bottom line, but it could hurt them in the long run. And the question, Adam, is how will it hurt them?
A good example would be, let's say you cut your sales force in half, right? So in the short term, you're not paying those salaries and benefits, right? So it goes to your bottom line, but in the longer run, you might be getting fewer contracts, right? Fewer new sales made.
And what you just mentioned, oddly enough, salespeople and marketing dollars are the first things the companies cut, and that's the stupidest thing to cut, because exactly to your point. But I think of, when we think of how can labor hurt a company, I think of, you go to a restaurant and you don't have a wait staff, or the cook, it takes longer to bring your food, or you go in a store and, we are all doing it now. We're going through self-checkout. We're now checking out ourselves. I don't see like a rebate where, hey, if you go over to the self-checkout line, you're going to save $5 today. We don't see that, right? Instead we see them looking, at what you're doing and spending more time on checking your receipt when you leave. I'm not even showing you my receipt. Okay. You want to know what's in then you come over here and you stand as I'm scanning. I'm not stopping for you to check my receipt, but here's the thing. We have become numb to what customer service even means anymore. Sure. So we're used to it. So how's that going to hurt? You go into a store, we've already been trained to, if you want to find something, you better have the store's app so it's in aisle 22, bin 11, slot 4 or sure. C. We're already conditioned to shopping sucks. The experience horrible. That's why we do it online, because we don't even want to deal with people anymore when we go out to do this. So, if we think that we need more people in these stores, no, we're being conditioned to accept that customer service is just awful.
So a couple of things there I'll try to unpack quickly. One is, more and more what's called shadow work is getting pushed onto the consumer, which is like all the stuff that a customer service person would do for you in a well-run company, right? So think of it like, I'm gonna get your product, your digital product, which I download, but then it needs a special driver for it. Well, all right, I got to go get that driver, right? And I'm basically doing all this tech work on behalf of your company to get your product to work for me, right? Or similarly, you're doing self-checkout, right, at a grocery store, but you're still paying the same price as if somebody was bagging your groceries for you, right?
And you're paying for your bag.
And you're paying for your bag, yeah. And in general, quality is also decreasing along with here, right? Quality of service, but oftentimes quality of product. I hope this isn't enough of a family show for me to make a real big gaffe here, but I can't remember the guy who writes about it, but the term he uses is the enshittification of the economy, which is just that things are, or we'll say encrapification of the economy, right? Where that kind of is the playbook, which is we're just going to, kind of like the frog in the boiling water, like as long as we don't push too much crap on them too fast, we can just, devolve our service, devolve our product quality over time in the interest of protecting our corporate profits. And if we do it slowly enough, the consumer will just kind of eat it. Now, the problem is that you get into substitutes, right? And so a really good example of that is take eating out. And I'm not talking fine dining. It's gotten to the point now, you've seen all the articles I've seen, right? Which is like, even at like the McDonald's of the world, people are really pushing back on prices now, right? And so many people, not just on the lower end of the economic scale, but I'm even seeing it where I am, and people who are sort of upper middle class saying, I'm done eating out. It's too expensive. It's gone bananas over the past 4 years. The quality of the food, if anything, has gone down. It's not as good as it was.
The sizes.
The sizes have gone down. And, and what just enrages me is I go in and I'll buy from a self-service or fast food type of place where I get the bill and it's stupidly high for crappy food. And then they turn the thing around and it says, do you want to tip us 15%, 20%, 25%, right? And so more and more people now have gotten to the screw it point where they're just like, I'm just going to buy ground beef and I'm going to make it at home, right? And so, there is a threshold beyond which that strategy really does backfire on the company itself. And I think more and more companies are hitting that. And we're seeing it all the time, right? We've seen, the Red Lobster just went bankrupt last week. We're seeing Starbucks, a lot of other big brand companies, Target, Walmart. They're saying, wow, people just aren't buying as much. And part of it's because they're financially pinched, like we've been talking about. And part of it is, I think they're hitting, because there's much more cost conscious now, they're hitting their point of screw it, right? Where they're just saying, look, your crappy products, your crappy service, or both are just not worth it for me at this price point anymore. So I think and I think we're in the early innings of that, if I had to predict.
You have anything to add to that?
Eating out, I think when your money tightens up, it's an easy thing to cut out. And it does.
You and
friends.
I went out to eat.
Like, I can afford to go out every night to eat if I wanted to, but I have friends who, they're not poor, but they go out to eat every day. I mean, they literally spend $100 a day on food and I'm not their parent. I just feel like asking them, are you planning? You're getting up in age there. I hope you got enough money stacked away, but you got to get out. You got to socialize. I shop at Costco. I live by myself, and pretty much every consumable item that I buy at Costco. And I like to look around when I'm probably only go once every 2 weeks, look at the basket sizes. I know I've become friendly with a couple of the checkout people just that I've met over the years. And they know I always ask them, are the basket sizes big? Are the bills big or small? And they're definitely they say they definitely notice they're
noticing. And that's
smaller.
Interesting because a Costco is going to do better for longer for a variety of reasons. But just like in real estate, right, where you've got the B level property, right, where in good times people from the C level properties are moving on up into the Bs, but in bad times people from the A level properties are moving down into the Bs. Mm-hmm. So they have more demand in both types of business cycles than either an A property or a C property does, right? And the Costco's of the world, as they start losing people on the lower end, they have people on the higher end who weren't shopping at Costco are now downshifting for the lower prices.
I hear that. I have watched some stuff about Walmart.
Yeah, but the fact that you're saying that they're even noticing still with that effect going on, that's something to pay attention to.
Because there's plenty of discretionary impulse type things in Costco. Plenty. When you get outside of the food part, it's full. That's all it is. Oh, look at that. I like that.
Yeah, and they sell diamond jewelry there. Yeah.
Well, gold bars.
Gold bars. Yeah.
And they'll have electronic items that if you go back 2 weeks later, they might not have it again.
Yeah.
Their products come and go, and so that kind of sticks you. But I spend plenty of discretionary money in Costco, usually on things that I think are a good purchase. But, one thing that we haven't talking about the middle class and people worried about losing. Are they too much or too little worried about losing their job? I know a lot of people that work for the government, especially federal government.
Yeah.
They don't know what the word layoff is.
No.
They've never even heard that word. And then I was surprised. I looked on my phone just in the past 10 minutes. I knew that the U.S. government was the largest employer in the country. It's only I just looked it up. If Google's not lying to me, it says it's 1.4% of the U.S. population. I think the population numbers is fake as the inflation numbers. They don't know how many people are here, but they say it's 1.4%. But that's only 12% of the government employees in the country. So I did the math. If I did it right, that means about 16% of the U.S. population, I don't know if that's working age or total population, work for the government at some level or another, whether it be just doing that math, that it was 1.2 million people work for the federal government, and that's 12% of government employees total. It comes
Got
out
it.
to like 16 million.
Okay.
It's small.
Yes,
I would have
16
thought. I
million.
would have thought more people than probably because of where we live. I would have thought a higher number of people work for the government of some sort or
And
another.
that's still pretty high. That's what, 1 in 8,
Yeah, you're right.
right?
But
That's very high.
And I was thinking tonight when Todd said, "Hey, do you want to come on and sit down and talk again?" And he told me it was middle class, and I asked early on, "Can we get some type of a agreed definition or throw around the idea of what is middle class?" When I thought about it driving in here tonight, most of the people that I know who I would consider middle class are people that work for the government,
So
and they have pretty nice lives. But
well, I was going to say, let me just add on to that. So remember in the ZERP era, right? That when, you really couldn't get any return for safe investments. Having a pension, having a government pension, was the equivalent of having millions of dollars
yeah,
in the bank, right? And so one of the concerns I have is if we continue along the current trajectory where more and more people really start losing their grip on the middle class ledge and falling below, right? When we start getting into tough times, recession, whatever the next crisis is,
I know where you're going with this. I think,
Yeah.
and I totally agree.
you get the societal friction or fault lines where people are saying like, well, wait a minute, how come my taxes are going up to continue to pay the pension for either my neighbor who's a government employee or my neighbor who happens to work for some organization that has a pension that was poorly enough managed that it needs a bailout, right? So I'm having to fund their rescue where I was a private sector worker. I don't have that benefit and I don't have millions in the bank and I'm really struggling here, right? So I do really worry about the social
I think
toxicity.
that could be major. Like if things really got high strung, and because I don't see how they aren't going to cut those unfunded liabilities. The math doesn't work. I mean, you can print and print, but it's how big are they, Adam? They're
And they're massive.
200. You hear different
By
numbers.
some calculations, they're hundreds of trillions, which
Yeah.
just means fantasy, right? Never get paid. But think about this: like most people I talk to think at some point there's going to be constraints placed on Social Security, more constraints than we have now, right?
like within 15 years.
Yeah, means
Well, it's
testing.
not even enough. It doesn't matter. I mean, right now it's not enough. If you are unfortunate enough to be required to live on Social Security and you can't, your health doesn't permit you to actually work, and you're trying to live on Social Security and using Medicare without some type of supplemental plan, you're screwed.
Absolutely. I mean, if
You're
you get the
completely
math,
screwed.
it's 3,500 or something like that. I'm doing this from memory, so I could be a little bit off, but it's a very difficult income to live off of.
It depends. I mean, on the East Coast here, I mean, you may be living on a check of $1,600 or $1,700 a month,
Yeah,
minus your Medicare.
$850 a month. I mean, it was not.
It's
It's not enough. And here's the crime about that, in my opinion. You look at it, you go, man, 7.65% of your paycheck you're paying to FICA, Medicare, and Social Security. Every dollar that you make up to whatever it is now, 95,000, I think it is, 90 or 95,000. You pay. They keep raising that limit because people are needing to make more than that just to live. But let's just say 7.65%. Then your employer is matching that. So I mean, you can do the math. Almost 16% of your pay forever, your entire working career is going into FICA, Social Security, and Medicare. And they may say, well, your employer's matching that. Guess what? That's money that you're not getting, right? You can look at it and you can say, well, my employer's matching my Social Security and my Medicare that comes out of my check. But guess what? You're not getting paid more money because of that, because it's a cost to your employer. Mm-hmm. Now you take that and you pay that for 40 years, 50 years. And you don't have enough at the end of the day. I mean, then why, if it's not going to be enough for you to live, why are you required to pay it?
Right.
I think over time it's just become a tax. They've spent that money already. There's no trust fund. They collect it and they spend it.
Right. Well, but to our earlier conversation, Cliff, like they're going to mean tests and age limit and stuff, Social Security, but are they going to do that for government pensions?
Yeah.
I don't think
They don't pay Social Security.
Right. So, but my point is just imagine the sense of relative betrayal that the people who depend on Social Security and it's getting cut, and then they find out that the government employees aren't getting touched. And I'm not trying to demonize government employees, folks. If you're one watching, I'm definitely not. I'm just pointing out, humans are evolutionarily wired to hate injustice.
But I think another one along the same vein is going to be healthcare. I mean, I think that is going to.
Well,
Luckily, I haven't had a lot of personal experience with relatives or even with healthcare, but especially with more people coming into the country, if you don't have any assets for the healthcare system to attach and take from you, you get the best it's the best healthcare you can get. You can walk into the emergency room for anything. And it's happening now. Everybody I know who goes to the emergency room in the past year says you would not believe. I don't care if it's a county hospital, shock trauma down in Baltimore. People walk into the emergency room, and literally, if you only get screwed if they have things for them to take for remuneration.
I totally agree with you, Cliff. My mother passed away last year, and she had gone into her elder years with a lot of bad financial decisions behind her. So she had no income, no assets. Literally, all she had was her $850 a month Social Security check. And the amount of healthcare dollars that were spent on her in her last couple of years of life were mind-boggling. And as a child, I was very grateful for that of her. As an American who is very focused on economic sustainability, I was just thinking, this is crazy.
Yeah. I was talking with a healthcare worker that works in, the long-term care kind of thing, right? And you talk about, geez, God forbid, that, you're not prepared when this type of thing happens. But, what she said to me was completely it was awful. And by the way, there's something in the news here in the Baltimore Sun where I think patients or their advocates, their kids are suing these retirement communities because the way that they were neglected, their parents or their relatives were neglected. But you talk about this is kind of, look, I'm sorry if this is disgusting, but what was told to me was that they will let an elderly person in one of these facilities, maybe not all, literally go to the bathroom in a diaper, that it costs less to change a diaper than it does to actually come into the room and assist them to go to the bathroom, which for many reasons would keep them stronger, right? More physical, right. To at least keep some of their, my gosh, their dignity, right?
And more sanitary and dignity, yeah, all that, yeah.
But we've come to a point where it's cheaper to just let them go to the bathroom in an adult diaper and change it. Then it takes less time to do that than it does to help them go to the bathroom and wait for them. To wait for them to finish, that's a sad state of affairs.
So I get a couple of things. We don't have time for this, but I think part of that is the role of private equity, right?
I have one question. I can hold it. But remind me, I got a good question for you, Adam. Right. I can ask it later.
We'll do. But private equity is taking over so many industries, and the critics of it, and I think they're valid in many cases, is what they're doing is you're just hollowing out these industries, right? They're running them at the bare bones and then harvesting as much as they can out of the company before they try to sell it, to the rubes on Wall Street through an IPO. And so it's a huge part of the encrapification process that we're talking about. Like I said, that's a whole other discussion, but I do want to flag it because it is an important one if you're watching and that's not already on your radar. I'm going to get to your question in 1 second, Cliff. There's just a question I want to ask you guys before we're done here, and I'm going to.
Private equity's done a lot in healthcare, right? Massive.
Exactly. Yeah, they've taken over a lot of health.
I have friends who are radiologists who said my career sucks ever since private equity took over MedStar. Yes,
and I'm willing to bet that example that that Todd just mentioned to us is from a nursing home that's owned by private equity, and that was a directive. Hey, this is a way to save, get our staff costs down by another 0.8%. Let's just go to that.
I interrupted you. You said you had a question.
Yeah, so I put this out on my ex Twitter account the other day, and it has gone viral, probably more than any other tweet that I've had. And I just want to read it to you guys because it's germane to the general topic of middle class, but it's specific to real estate. So let me just read it to you. Mortgage rates spiked from 3% to over 7%. That should have sent home prices down, but it hasn't. But then the cost of insurance, property taxes, and maintenance also surged. These should also reduce home prices. So what's the compelling argument that prices won't ultimately adjust downwards?
You're speaking to the choir, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is no compelling argument that they won't drop or adjust because, I think that this has been a perfect storm. We're now seeing the results of the buyer demand simply pull away, and it's been an inventory issue. So the only reason why the prices haven't dropped is we have, foreign investors, Canadians buying our real estate, Chinese buying our real estate. We have a lot of foreign money, and believe it or not, statistically speaking, Canadians buy more. I think they're the largest foreign buyer of our real estate, believe it or not. And, but that in itself, investors have been buying a third of all of the available real estate that hits the market. So, we have watched where the inventory issue is just sucked out the available homes on the market. And then that boils down to an equally smaller pot of people that, quite honestly, have cash or parents have cash, and the parents are buying. It's amazing. Seeing the over $1 million properties in our area. Now, Adam, that's nothing out on the West Coast. But for us here locally, $1 million, $1.2 million, I mean, that's
a regular house.
That's for the wealthy here, right? I mean, it's not, the bulk of Maryland is not.
Starter home out here in California, but yeah.
Yes, but here, I mean, we're looking at starter homes that are priced, depending on what area, anywhere from $450,000 to $650,000. But the amount of over $1 million sale price transactions that are cash right now are staggering. And what they're doing is they're getting their money from family. Their parents are, cash flush. Hey, rather than buy that jumbo loan at 7.5% or 8%, we'll do it for you for 4%. We'll just give you the cash. So we're seeing a waning demand. And I'm telling you, that has changed drastically in the last 30 days, certainly in the last 2 weeks. Like I said when we started the show, 2 buyers specifically in the last couple of days that have been priced out of the market, that have been sidelined, have gotten deals on real estate that they wouldn't have gotten a month and a half ago, and it's coming. It's here now.
And is that because transactions haven't increased yet? Because you were saying they're drier than they've ever been, right?
It's because more inventory is hitting the market.
It is, okay.
And it's because the typical borrower now can't afford a loan. If they don't have mom and dad to give them a cash advance, they're screwed.
They can't afford it, or they're not qualifying for it, right?
Well, even if they are qualified, they can't make the payments.
Right.
I mean, when you just said it. See, people are protected by the homestead credit. I think most of the country. I mean, I don't know every state's property tax laws and, what they qualify for or don't qualify for. But as your primary residence, a lot of states, most states, maybe even all states, have homestead tax credit. And what that means is that prevents the massive price increase to your property taxes year over year. it's a phased in assessment, right? Which means that if you get your mortgage, today, that you can afford, next year you won't be assessed, or I won't say next year, but the year after that, you won't be assessed the higher tax if property taxes really escalate. However, what people don't realize is that, and they try and phase in, or when you're getting a mortgage, they try and say, hey, your tax prices are going to go up. So if you buy a house and you look at what they're being assessed, the seller is being assessed, you have to really look at that number, because if they're being assessed at $450,000 and you're paying now because they've been in the house for 20 years and their homestead tax credit has protected them from a real, what we'll call market rate of property tax, when that leaves the seller's hands and goes to the buyer's hands, it instantly jumps from whatever that assessment is to what you just bought your property for.
It's a much more expensive property to own. Yeah, exactly.
100%. So, and a lot of these buyers are not prepared for that. They think that they are, but their insurance costs are what has really taken a lot of them. I know people that are in the $2,600 a month, $2,700 a month mortgage payment with escrows that now have to pay $800 or $1,000 more in 1 year for their escrow costs. They're like, I don't have an extra $1,000 a month to pay.
Right.
Would a standard mortgage underwriting process not pick up that your property tax is going to reset?
Well, they're going to know what yes, they're going to know what it resets to, but again, the homestead tax credit, but it's still a major jump.
Yeah.
And because people are looking, when they're shopping for a home, they're like, oh, well, this tax is only $4,700 a year. And then all of a sudden they buy it and they're like, wow, now we're $7,000 a year. Right. So it's an expensive cost.
Yeah. So a couple of things. And the last time I was talking with you, Todd, we talked about how we both believe that time was on the buyer's side here. This is a great example of that. I believe you still feel the same, right?
100%. And 100%. I think if you're out there right now and you're on the sidelines to buy, you should be reaching out to us, because I can tell you right now, I don't know how long the window will be. I have a feeling what will happen is prices will eventually get to a point to where more investors come out of the woodwork, and then you'll just be competing with investors again. So I think that you can find a deal right now. If you're looking at houses that have been on the market more than 10 days, 14 days, the sellers are already freaking out.
They're already like, why is it motivated?
Yeah, they're like, why isn't somebody put an offer on my house? I was speaking to an agent about a week ago, and my client was maybe going to be putting an offer in on the house, but we found another house instead. But we were watching it, and the agent listed the house and put a remark that said all offers due by Monday at 6:00. And the house went on the market on Thursday, and the description was already pre-baked, assuming that there were going to be multiple offers.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, what do you have? Offers in hand already? I mean, you've already put a date of an offer deadline. Mm-hmm. And so I called the agent on Sunday. Now, Monday at 6:00, where all offers are due. And on Sunday, I called the agent and I said, well, what do you have? And she said, well, honestly, I thought I'd have a lot more, but I only have 2 offers. And so here, this agent, look, you can ask as many questions as you want. Whether or not they should be telling you the answers to the questions, well, that's up for further discussion. But I said, is it over asking price? And she said, well, not yet, but I'm going to be asking for highest and best round. I'm like, you only have 2 freaking offers, and none of them are over list price, and now you're going to push the envelope. And here's the problem. You can lose both of your offers, right? Because you ask for a higher and best price. My answer is, we already gave it to you. We're not going to compete with ourselves. And that's what you're asking. You're asking a buyer, and I don't like this when agents do it. I think it's a terrible it's a terrible way to do business. If you say you don't even know what's going on, you just say to the 2 contracts, hey, put your highest and best foot forward. They both may say, we're out. And then you're screwed to your seller, because you've got no other offers. you've been on the market for 5 days, and now you're sitting there holding your bag where people are like, well, I thought offers were due Monday at 6 o'clock. And then you got to say, yeah, well, we didn't get anything at the seller was.
It's a realtor clinging to the playbook of now what appears to be a bygone era, right? That's a sign of the times. So I see we're coming up on the 2-hour mark. I've got one or two other questions around this. Do we have time to take
We do. Let's hit these super chats real quick, Adam, and then let's dive in.
Okay.
So Charles, thank you so much. Here we are. I like how I get paid at work. I get paid by the load in trucking. So it incentives me to work harder so I get paid more. Charles, love your honest comment. You get paid.
And I love those type of models too, Charles. Like, stick with that type of model. Works for you, works for the employer, right?
100%. I think we have one more that we didn't get to.
There was a gentleman asking about soft treasury auctions.
Right.
Was that the one? I'll give my quick answer on that, which is I'm not reading too much into that personally. Demand for treasury auctions, it goes up, it goes down. It's been softer over the past year or so, as we're definitely seeing, foreign central banks buying less treasuries. And interestingly, we're seeing them buy a lot more gold. So there definitely does seem to be a worldwide shifting of sovereign balance sheets. To say we're gonna conscientiously hold more gold, and to fund it, we're gonna sell treasuries. But there's a lot of writing out there. Back to our earlier conversation, Cliff. Oh my gosh, the world's giving up on the dollars. All these foreign countries are selling their dollars. Nobody wants them anymore. I don't think that's the case. I don't think the dollar is going to disappear overnight as a key treasury holding for foreign central banks. So I just and also too, like, if we get into the recession era that I think we might go into, there's going to be a resurgence in demand for treasuries. There's going to be a big safety trade. So I think what you're seeing here is more noise than signal. Personally,
no. You look at the oil trades that have been settled in currencies other than U.S. dollar. It's hard to say it's anything that it's a tectonic shift, and I think it's going to accelerate. You're more expert than I am. That's that's the data that I look at and the things I hear.
And to be clear, I wouldn't claim to be a bigger expert than you.
Well, I said you probably are. I don't. You talk to some pretty stellar people on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But they're settling trades. Things that used to be lockstep settled in dollars no longer are. There's a lot of multilateral currency trading. Commodity trading going on, and the dollar's out of it.
Yep, and no doubt, and I do think over time that will continue. But
the treasury part of it, if you look at the foreign demand for treasuries, they have dropped off a lot. And as you said, they're stacking gold. So who are we selling them to? We're selling them to our pension funds. We're selling them to ourselves. And the Fed themselves buy them sometimes.
Right. And key thing to note about that, and I mentioned this earlier, is, one of the reasons why I sort of scratch my head and say, gosh, interest rates have gone up so much. How come the economy hasn't rolled over yet? Well, a part of that answer is that there's a big part of affluent America that's getting a juicy, safe return off of these treasuries that they now own a lot more of. And that actually does act as a form of stimulus. So funnily enough, to think that these restrictive rates are actually acting as a stimulus, but they are in some ways.
And I think even like with housing prices, if you run the exercise of pricing the house and watching the trend in something other than U.S. dollars, and it looks different. Price the house in gold. They're coming down. They're coming down.
Oh, absolutely. Well,
and they're coming down a lot.
That's back to Tom Hunting, which is like, hey, until something massive changes and we really get religion and adopt a whole better way of doing things, expect more of that. I see
a question here.
Yeah, I see his question here. Folks, I really try to avoid using words like apocalypse. And part of this because, folks, I've been in this business for 15 plus years at this point in time. All these issues that we're talking about today, the debt, the currency debasement, the bad policies, the bad decision making, the mismanage of incentives and priorities of the rich versus the regular Americans. These things have been existing for a long, long time, and since I've been covering them, I've had people 15 years ago who said, oh my gosh, I'm selling everything tomorrow. I'm getting out of all of my dollars. I'm going all into gold or all into buying a retreat property and building a bunker, right? And I've seen people make radical decisions around their lifestyles and their financial allocations, positioning, because of these fears. And it's one of the reasons why, on this topic of de-dollarization, I am kind of reiterating, like, I don't think it's going to happen overnight, because I want people to be cautious about getting too wrapped up in their emotions around this, because this is emotionally charging stuff that we're talking about. And I just want people to avoid, if you're making an important financial decision out of emotion, it's highly likely to probably be a bad decision. Our emotions force us to usually make the wrong decisions at the wrong times, especially around money. So I'm urging caution here, even if you may very well be right on where the end game is, but none of us knows the timing. And a lot of this game is going to play out longer than most of us realize. And so again, I'm just trying to deliver a healthy sense of caution here, of not to just put all your eggs in one basket, tomorrow, because you're so convinced this thing has to happen now. I've seen a lot of people where they made that bet and it didn't happen, and they were much worse off financially than if they had taken a slower pace. But to try to answer that question, Todd, just in the spirit of it, I think it's largely going to be a slow burn. I think the key things to worry about now is just at some point we're going to have a material market downturn. Todd kind of gave a nod earlier about how incredibly rich valuations are right now. So I think that you should be finding ways to position your portfolio, at least with hedges, to minimize your vulnerability to a market correction 20% plus. Which could happen tomorrow, it could happen in 2 years. Who knows when it's going to happen? Like I said, I think the probability is probably highest after the election. But I think the other thing is if you work for a paycheck, you've got to be spending a lot of time trying to figure out what you would do if your employer started getting into trouble and if you were in danger of losing your job. So what are the things you can do to make yourself more essential, or what are the things you can be doing now in case you do get laid off, to be a step ahead of everybody else who's going to be begging for a job out there. So those are the two things that I think in the relatively near term, like next 6 to 10 months ish, I'd be most concerned about.
And I'd like to add to that and say, and I think they're great points, but I think we have to be mindful of our spending, because a lot of times, we run with, look, and I mentioned it earlier, history tells us that we don't always have good times. And whether, it's an apocalypse or not, obviously that is a bit extreme. And I don't think that we're telling everybody to, run to their bunkers. I don't think it's an issue of that. But I think that we have to start being responsible. And when we start thinking about how we're teaching that you can jack up debt and it's okay not to pay it. What are we doing? Where's our moral compass?
Right.
When we're looking at there's no repercussions for our decisions and our actions, we're really starting to set up a society that doesn't strategically plan.
Right.
And we're starting to eliminate thinking on our own. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. I think that we need to start, budgeting. I mean, hey, do we have budgets? Do you have a household budget?
Yeah.
Do you, economics, 101, right? It's a balance. So to have something means that you don't have something else. So what we have to start looking at, we have to realize that if we decide we're giving up something to get something, that's how it works. Right? When we come to the conclusion that we don't have to give anything up, or that there doesn't have to be any wants and deprivation, where it's okay to continue to have, we're not teaching the right fundamentals. And I think that they're the ones that get hurt the most when the shit hits the fan.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, so that's what we're saying, is we're trying to say, wake up, guys. This doesn't look right. This is not normal. Pay attention. Stop wasting money. $10 coffees you may need to start making your own coffee.
I think.
So I'm glad you said that, because earlier you said people have got to earn more money, right? They've got to increase their income, given where we're headed into. Totally agree with that. And I was going to interject earlier, and I'm glad you brought it here, which is, and also reduce your cost footprint, right? Which is what you were just talking about there. And if you look at America right now, if you look at the majority of America, what have we done? Retail sales have basically flatlined, meaning we're not reducing our overall spending yet, right? We're at the point where it's not growing that much anymore, and that's a warning sign. But we haven't really, slowed our spending yet. But if you look at our debt balances, our revolving credit has exploded, right? So we've got record debt balances, which we're now paying record high APRs on. So basically, we have, instead of tightening our belts, Todd, what we are doing as a mass populace right now is just pushing more and more of it on the plastic, which any sane person knows has a limit, right? So
But
we are.
How is that different than? I know we're wrapping up here, but you're describing to me what I'm hearing a microcosm of what the country on the whole has been doing since 1971. I was 3 years
Absolutely.
old. I've spent my whole life in a Ponzi scheme.
We don't have a printing press. We can't
Right.
print our own money together.
But I mean, when you say you got to tell people you can't borrow on your credit card to pay off the other credit card, that's what the people running fiscal and monetary policy have been doing, hands down, non-stop. It's hard to run your own house in order when the one that controls you is completely out of order.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, so yes, we're
Anyway. Oh,
but the Todd's key point here is yes, the average, the masses are on a bad trajectory, but you as an individual, especially a critically thinking one, if you're watching Todd's videos here, you've got the ability you've got agency in the story, and you have the ability to control and take charge of your own financial destiny. So, educate yourself like we've been talking about. And as I said at the very beginning, take that information and then use it to make smart, prudent decisions in your life to improve your individual prospects for prospering.
Do you remember I said I had a question for you? Can I still ask?
Yeah, hit me.
Adam,
I still have one for Todd. So
now I'm going to break it into one question into two bifurcated parts. So you would say macro-wise, this country has some pretty big challenges, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to know your answer. This isn't a gotcha or a quiz type question. I want to know what you think. So in the macro scene, and I said, I said, I think it's pretty amazing to turn on and watch our current president. It just blows me away sometimes. And that's not a vote for anybody else. I'm talking about him in isolation. Do you think who wins the presidential election is going to make a material difference in our macro situation?
No, I think it can make a difference it may make a difference in the very long term. But in general, it's interesting because a lot of policies between Biden and Trump are more different than we've had in previous administrations. But when you look at the general playbook, so two things. One, I think the problems are big enough that no individual administration are going to be able to resolve them, right? They've gotten the debt, right? There's just no administration that's going to come in and clean up our debt in 4 or 8 years, right? So no, I think we're going to be paying the piper for the vast majority of the macro issues that we face. But I think if you look at the past 40 years or so of Republican and Democratic administrations, the stump speeches are very different between both parties, but the actual policies that are enacted during their administrations are scarily similar.
Spendy.
It's incredibly spendy, yep. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the differences that you hear on the campaign trail, when it comes down to actual,
they're different parties, but they're both still government.
They're both still government. I do think that, whatever you want to call it, the swamp or whatever, it's the parts of the government that persist across administrations, they're very hard to change.
I was just curious. I don't think, in some regards, certainly it's going to make a stark difference. I think divisiveness, either one of them is going to be huge. Immigration, and I'm not saying that any of those are small things, but big picture, macro, I don't think it's going to make much difference either. And it's a little bit, it's a little depressing to not feel like there's someone in the race that inspires me, at least in a way that they are at least going to try and have some kind of a reconciliation of where we're at. And I just don't see that happening.
I agree with you. I think it's a lot of depressing. And the one little bit of optimism I'll give you is when I interviewed Neil Howe, the demographer who wrote about the fourth turning, right? Guessing you're familiar with the fourth turning.
I am. I tried to read it. I tried to read it, but I had to do it on audiobook. It got so dense, but it's a good book.
But I asked him, I said, look, when I think back on other really volatile times in history where there was a lot of change, there were great leaders that emerged at those times. And it's not enough to be against something. You have to create a platform for people to be for and to rally around and specifically ask for the reform you want to see. And I was like, just think of the 60s, right? You had, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and, the leaders of the women's rights movement. And just, you had all these people who created a standard, describe what it stood for, and then people rallied around them. And I was like, I'm just looking around. I'm not seeing anybody like that.
I kind of feel that way about RFK Jr. a little bit, but
he a little bit. He has some of that element right now.
And he's if you're a critical thinker, you're already leaps and bounds ahead of most of the other ones. Anyway.
But RFK isn't he doesn't have a mainstream following yet, and that's not a criticism of him. These things take time. But where I'm going with this is, I asked, I was like, do we just have like a bad crop of leaders this time around? And he said no. He said in the past, those leaders you're talking about, none of them thought their plan was not to become the leader.
Yeah.
It was just the pressures got so great that the forces of history conspired to force them into the limelight. And he said, the pressures just aren't strong enough yet. But when they get bad enough and strong enough, it will start thrusting the right leaders, into positions where they can start a movement. And so the depressing part of that is it has to get worse first. But the optimistic part of it is, hey, we're demoralized by our current board of leaders, but maybe some better ones will be created soon. Okay, Todd, I got one last for you, if that's all right. Sure. And then we got to get to Mr. Angry. But here's the question I really just wanted to get your thoughts on. So many more things we could talk about on that housing question that I mentioned, but one of the factors you mentioned that's been keeping prices high has been the investor capital that's been coming into the single family home market, which is, we've always had the mom and pop investors, but what's different this time around is the amount of certainly institutional capital that's in the single family home market, but also the level of foreign capital that you've said, right? And in this type of world, to Cliff's concerns, I think more and more investors have been saying, I want to own real assets, ideally ones that produce cash flow, right, in an environment of inflation or fear of stagflation, right? So housing's a great, option for that. So we now have institutional investors, foreign investors, and this like top 10, 20% that's doing really well and wants to diversify their holdings that are getting more and more into the single family home space, which of course is pushing more and more people who want a roof over their head, right? They're just aspiring residents of these buildings. Do you see, what probability do you see for eventually legislation being passed to curtail that? To say, under certain circumstances, we want to give priority to the person who wants to live the regular person who wants to live in the house.
Well, there were a couple bills that were being proposed, and one of them was capping the amount of properties that they could own, and the other was imposing higher fees to them. The other was to have them sell off, to force the ones that do own to sell off their assets. And, I think it sounds good, but it directly goes against capitalism. And it also goes against the Wall Street, because a lot of these companies are Wall Street type of
Blackstones and all those guys,
100%. So I think that the I don't think this story goes very well because unfortunately, and I've had some great guests on my channel. We've talked about this in great length about how this thing really started. Usually when we see government programs, that are implemented to deal with a problem, it's like having the committee at church. You create a committee to deal with an issue, and then when the issue is handled, you create more issues to keep the committee going.
Right.
And
then we get mission creep and yeah.
So what happens is, this whole thing was started when we had the massive foreclosures and we saw the properties in the communities. I mean, we all remember what they look like if we're old enough. Grass was 2 feet tall, properties were boarded up. It was dangerous swimming pools in the yards where, they look like frog ponds. People could, it was a safety issue for the community. So the banks were paying for people to board up and cover these pools and cut the grass and all these different things. So one of the programs was to sell these foreclosed homes to Wall Street, and with the condition that they would rent these houses back to the people that lost them, not directly, not the same people in the same houses, but provide, do the improvements to the properties and hold on to them for at least a year. Well, what these companies realized was that the price that they were paying for them, these properties cash flowed at renting these properties, and they made money. And then from 2013 to now, they've seen massive price appreciation. So these companies really, they fared pretty good at this program. But now, how do you take it from them? I don't think that you can, right?
Yeah. So it's super thorny, and I don't necessarily know the answer here, but we can say on one side of the scale, right, where it's increasingly hard for the individual home buyer to compete against these guys, right? And all three of the people I talked about, right? Just the regular wealthy mom and pops, the institutions, and the foreign guys, right? So you can take that to its extreme and say, okay, eventually they own all the single family real estate, right? And everybody else just has to rent from them, right? I don't think anybody wants that, right? Now we don't want to create a massive state-controlled exchange for housing either, right? So I just find this really interesting because I think you do want to have some safeguards to the imbalance right now, but lovers of free markets and capitalism don't want to go to a socialist style solution. And I've got a couple of ideas, but I don't know what the answer is. But a smart guy like you, I imagine, probably chews on this a lot.
I think that, like I said, I don't think the story ends well. I think that we're going to see more and more of single-family inventory get gobbled up by investors. There are a lot of them, foreign investors, are parking their money. They don't even care about the cash flow.
Okay, let me ask you this. Like, to me, I feel like that's the lowest fruit on the tree. Like, why can't we say, look, at least when the unaffordability ratio to the median home buyer is above X, we determine whatever level that is. Why don't we just say no foreigners can buy a single family home when it's above that, right? Because what benefit does it do to society to have foreigners gobble up our single family home inventory when our aspiring populace can't afford it?
When you buy a HUD-owned property, a foreclosure, there is a 30-day first look period where investors can't buy that property. And there's fraud within that as well because they put it in their name and buy it, and you have to sign affidavits saying that you're going to live in the property. But the problem with the program is that in the first 30 days, it really is designed to open it up to owner-occupants or nonprofits. So for 30 days, investors cannot buy it. Statutorily, they should not be buying. I mean, if they do it and they're committing fraud, well, I mean, I guess you can never prevent bad actors, from doing something like that. But my point is that would be one way. If you said, look, the first period of time that a house goes on the market, it is only available for owner occupants. Well, then you have to look at the backside of it and say, well, you're a seller. You want the most competition and the highest price possible. So can you really come in, and that's taking away more property rights. So you really can't do that either. So when you say to a seller, it's a bigger problem. It's not just a matter of keeping out foreign investors. It's property rights. It's ownership rights. It's being able to sell your house to whoever you want.
Right. But here's where it gets a little complicated. Like, China would love to buy U.S. ports and operate them for our government, right? But we say no because it's a matter of national security.
But who owns the ports?
Pardon me?
Who owns the ports?
I mean, we do domestically, right?
But who's we?
Well, the U.S. It's either the government or U.S.
But you own your house.
A lot of them have some partial government ownership. Like the Newport News is one of the bigger ports around here that's got a lot.
Right.
The Baltimore Port Authority.
Yeah, my point is we have these assets, these real assets, where we just say, look, we're not going to let a foreigner own them because they're too strategically significant for the country. Right?
But that's government-owned property.
Could we say that? Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's
but could we say that
government-owned.
about just sort of national housing? And again, I'm spitballing here. So like I said, I don't know the answer. But like, could the government just say, look, in times where the majority of our populace can't afford this stuff, maybe that's a time where we turn off that opportunity. And yeah, if you're planning on selling your home to a guy in Russia or wherever, you can't right now because prices. We need to give preference to our domestic buyers.
That would be reducing your property rights. I mean, I'm not saying that I agree with this happening, but I also disagree with the reduction of ownership rights. It's your property. You should be able to sell it to whoever you want.
I guess that's the thorny part here. Yeah, which is you were saying, it gets messy. Like, because I think some of these priorities may be mutually exclusive, and we'll have to figure out which one we're going to go with.
Let me put it this way to you. All right, you're selling your house. All right, you don't know where you're going to go, but you want to sell your house, or you get a letter in the mail that says, "I'll buy your house. If you're thinking about selling, I will buy your house and I will let you live in that house for a year, rent free. But I'm going to pay you in 2 weeks, and I'm not going to get an inspection. I don't care what you fixed or didn't fix in your house. Are you going to be interested in that deal?
Sure.
Do you care whether I'm a foreign investor or a corporation?"
Yeah, no, this is an example where I think the individual, here's what we're trying to balance. And again, I don't know the answer here, right? But you're talking to the interests of the individual who will always maximize it for themselves, right? I'm saying we have a societal problem that the current market structure is creating. And so are there ways to reform the current market structure that address the societal problem that are still acceptable enough on the individual level, right? So we may have to have compromise in both parts here. And I know that libertarian and pure free market people hate the fact I'm even bringing this up, and I'm very much a free market guy. But I'm looking at the current market structure and saying it's actually gotten kind of captured by the biggest players here, and that it's resulting in a societal injury that I don't think we want.
I like the idea, or at least some concept of it, limiting foreign purchases when there's a supply constraint. But one thing I think it would be probably ripe for circumvention. That'd be one thing. And then, but I do like the idea. I mean, I've lived in countries, very sophisticated, very high quality of living countries where a foreigner cannot own property, period.
Yep.
You can, and that's not that uncommon around the world. You can lease it for 100 years. You cannot own a speck of property. But in that, I'm not changing the topic, but I think very related in a supply constraint, I think, I'm not phrasing this very eloquently, I think the foreclosure process is extremely broken if not just the foreclosure, but the bailouts. The bailouts are affecting the supply because people who cannot afford the house that they're living in are not having to give it up and put it back into the supply-demand equilibrium. And I think that I would like to see the numbers. I'll bet you, if I had to place a bet, I'll bet that's a bigger number than foreign purchases. We had a deal happen here. Have you ever heard? Do you know who Marilyn Mosby is, Adam?
I'm not familiar with the name.
She was the state's attorney for Baltimore City, and she was very controversial. She was a Soros funded prosecutor, and she got charged with mortgage fraud, and she didn't disclose that there was a tax. She had a tax lien that she said she didn't know about because her husband never told her. I know for a fact from the type of work that I do that and I didn't like this woman. I didn't like her policies. I thought she was terrible and caused a lot of damage. But what they charged her with and took her to the mats with are things that people do all day, every day. If you looked at the rolls of deeds and deeds of trust and who committed fraud in obtaining the credit that they did to buy, and they made her disgorge one of her properties in Florida. If you did that with all the deeds in the United States, you would have a hell of a lot of inventory. I will almost guarantee it. And we don't do that. And the bailouts. I mean, if you can't afford your house, it does seem like law of the jungle, but that's capitalism too. If you can't afford it, you got to go.
Todd's got a lot more, I think, informed opinion on this than me. But of course, we're coming off after these periods of all these moratoriums and stuff like that, where we've artificially, extended this issue here. And in terms of inventory, Todd and I have talked about this in the past. There's all sorts of contenders, right? There's inventory from people that lose their jobs if we go into a recession, which you mentioned earlier, right? But there's the short-term rental market, right? That as those really start to become unprofitable, you're going to get a lot of guys start dumping those things. You have some of these institutional investors, right? If times get tough and some of these firms get into real trouble, they've been kind of selling to each other right now when a firm's gotten into trouble, but at some point they just might need to just start dumping a bunch of inventory, right? Like there's a whole parade of additional inventory triggers that I'm sure Todd could rattle off a longer list even than I can. And you're nodding as I'm saying all this, Todd. So anyways, I'll shut up and let you respond in any way.
No, I mean, it could change in a minute, where we see a glut of inventory. I think that will happen. I think that as
we got new build construction in some of the hottest markets, that's like 2 years of supply that's still coming through the pipeline, right?
Yeah, I mean, nationwide, we're more than 7 months of supply in house, new construction. It just depends on whether it's in your town or not. But the seller contributions that we're seeing now, are pretty dramatic compared to where they were, just 2 years ago. But again, a lot of these investors. I was just speaking with a D.R. Horton representative, and I was asking about a rent to own. I mean, not a build to rent. Scenario in one of their Maryland communities, and she said that she is authorized. They have their townhouses, and there's they call them a building, and I think there's 7 or 9 units in what they consider a building, but they are allowed to sell one of those per building to a buyer, an investor buyer for a rental. A lot of people, they think that when you have rentals in a community, that can bring property values down, because a lot of these corporate investors, they don't take care of the property. I mean, they're not even in the state, a lot of them. So they get management companies to manage the property. It could be a problem for the property values and the quiet enjoyment of the community when these rentals exist. But a lot of it, when we're talking about short-term, people know the nightmares with that. I mean, if you live next to a short-term rental and it's a popular one, you have a party your neighbor has a party with different people every single week. So a lot of the communities are now outlawing those. Where they're saying, you know what, we're not allowing any short-term rentals. You need to at least have a monthly, tenant in place, or you're not allowed to operate. So we're just starting to see, as people are realizing that these things are not profitable and they cost a lot of money, this inventory is going to enter the market, and it is. We're seeing it, but we're just seeing it being absorbed still. And I think the issue is, this is going to be the inventory is controlled, and it's controlled from a government. It's a government control, because unless they allow developers and encourage developers to build more inventory, the red tape and the cost of this inventory that's being built is not affordable in itself. So, I mean, that's another problem altogether.
And we were talking the other day about the transaction volume off market.
Yeah, and this is something, and I know we're getting late here, but and Adam, I know you had
that was
something.
interesting.
Yeah, so Adam, two things. Are you familiar with the fact that Freddie Mac wants to
Yes.
Encourage
Enter the home equity loan market.
I mean second mortgages, just call it, right?
I see that you interviewed Melody Wright about this. I called her up the day I saw the Financial Times article by Meredith Whitney and had a long conversation with her. So very familiar with this topic.
So, what this is, when I look at it as the government knows that we have a lot of equity sitting in our houses. Mm-hmm. And when we look at it and we say, okay, Americans are tapped out with costs, but they have, they don't have money in their bank accounts, and they don't have available credit because their credit cards are maxed out, but they're sitting on a house that they can't sell because they need a place to live. Mm-hmm. But there's this equity that's sitting there in their house,
paper equity,
that they want to encourage you to take on more debt and utilize that equity to do other things like pay off your expensive credit card bills or keep the economy moving, maybe, right? So what Freddie Mac wants to do is they want to actually sell these second mortgages on the secondary market. And if this happens, I mean, we're 2008 all over again times 10, right? Because people can't afford, I mean, right now they're a paycheck away from not paying their current mortgage, regardless of how much equity they have. Now, at least they can sell it now because, they have the equity that if they get in a jam, they can actually sell their house and put a little bit of money in their pocket and pay off their mortgage. But when they take out these second mortgages and mortgage that house to the hilt and blow through that money that they got and turn their equity to cash, man, they're really screwed because they're not going to be able to sell.
It's one of the worst ideas I think I've ever heard in my lifetime.
Horrible idea.
I mean, I could tell you my reasons.
Probably likely to happen.
Well,
it's going to happen.
But let me add, there's a real question. For one thing, home equity based on what price? Who's doing these valuations?
You're thinking this too rationally.
But I'm just saying, okay, if you give everybody equity based on some paper lofty price, well, guess what? All that equity isn't there because you couldn't sell all those houses at once. Do you know what I'm saying? If they
I totally know what you mean. Yeah.
That's it. That I think when you hear the stories, what's their next big trick to kick the can down the road? How much money is it? Isn't it like $40 trillion or something? The equity that they say that is in people's houses, current owners, it's not a quadrillion.
Yeah, I know Meredith Whitney was saying it could put, if enacted soon, it could put $2 trillion into.
It's got to be more than $2 trillion
by September.
I mean, that's the next stimulus package.
I'm telling you, that is colossal.
And here's what they're doing.
Colossal.
And I'm already seeing letters with this. What they're doing is they're giving a 4.99% introductory rate for the first 12 months. I'm starting to see lenders, banks
crazy.
offering this. Get a home equity line, get a second mortgage on your house, tap into your equity, give yourself the freedom, loosen your belt, pay off those high payment, high interest rate credit cards. And here's what happens. They may do that, but they're not shredding their credit cards. So they're going to fill them right back up again. But Adam, let me just, what Cliff was saying, let me tell you what else is happening. we are underestimating when we say that the inventory is not there. We're assuming that everybody is playing by the traditional rule of looking at the MLS, right? Assuming that NAR, still the National Association of Realtors, is still the kingpin that, basically is controlling the inventory from a knowledge base. Okay. Right. This is the amount of available inventory that we have to sell. And guys, it's not a lot, so what happens is now when I'm bidding on that inventory, I'm paying more than I would have to if it was more inventory. Right. So, but most people are thinking still along that same train of old school of thought. What we know is happening is that the off-market property sales are happening at massive scale. Wholesalers sending postcards, knocking on doors, buying houses that never hit the MLS, right? A lot of investors are buying that way. Sub 2. A lot of people hear what that is somebody struggling paying their mortgage payment. Maybe they were part of the loan modification and now they're back in trouble again. They're knocking on their door because they're getting delinquency reports. So we're not seeing this foreclosure inventory hit the market because it's being absorbed by an off-market sale. So that is bigger than what most people realize. And that in itself is keeping our inventory off of the MLS. And that's going to get worse. So what we're doing, I just had a conversation with someone who moved from Maryland down to Florida. They want to move back, very savvy, astute buyers. And they're saying, hey, I'm coming into town and looking at an off-market property. If it works out well, that's great. If not, do we have any other off-market properties available? So what agents are doing, if you're a smart agent, is you're banging on doors. You're getting out from behind the desk. You're going and earning your money by knocking on the door and saying, hey, I have this whole list of buyers here. And that's what we're starting to do. I have this whole list of buyers here that are looking for the MLS properties that don't exist. All of these properties are happening off market. I'm going out and hit the street and knock on doors with my list of buyers looking for that 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath in a certain neighborhood that my buyer's been discouraged, after they put 15 offers in and haven't gotten a one. So this is what's happening. People are saving real estate fees by doing that. The seller's saving and the buyers are saving. And more importantly, they're getting what they want.
So let me just say on that, what you're describing there, Todd, is the role that a good realtor can play in this type of environment. And we've had a rising tide for so long where, realtors got away with, in many cases, just being a realtor with a heartbeat, right? Houses kind of sold themselves, right? Now in this type of market, to really find the right economic opportunities there and the inventory that may be off market, right? That's what a good realtor is bringing to you. So I just want to underscore this, that we're entering a different era. It's going to require a different playbook, and it's going to require a different type of realtor to guide you through it. And the type that Todd's talking about is exactly the type you want.
Would a lot of that type of transaction be done without realtors too, right?
Well, I mean, it's, if a realtor wants to survive in this market, this is what it will come down to.
What's NAR think about that?
Well, who knows what NAR, thinks about it. But the other component to that is that when you're looking at, sellers, or a lot, you had said it, Adam, and let's just address it real quick. There are a lot of agents that didn't earn their commission. They were not what's called as the procuring cause, right? So they weren't even entitled to a commission. And no one's challenged this yet, and I wait to see it because I think that will probably be some savvy attorneys out there that will, hey, if you went to the open house and found your own house and your agent didn't see the house but wrote the offer for you, they're really not the procuring cause and they weren't entitled to the real estate commission, and you may be entitled to having it back, right, to getting that money. And I'm not an attorney and don't do this off of what I'm saying, but I did have a conversation with an attorney that stated that. And so, and I had a situation on a property, very expensive, that the agent called up and said, "Hey, I want to write an offer for my client on this property." And I said, "Did you, I don't, I'm looking at the registry of, and I was there on every specific showing and, not a traditional sale. And I'm looking at the list and I'm like, well, who are your buyers?" And they were on the list of who came through. And because we recorded, everyone. And I said, "Well, did you see the property?" And the agent said, "No, I don't have to see the property." And I'm like, "Well, how? Yeah, you do. You're not the procuring cause. And why would you write an offer for a client that you didn't see the property?" And you know what he said to me? "Well, my clients know what they want." Well, what the hell do they need you for?
He's getting paid to write the offer.
I mean, if they know what they want, why use you? They don't need you. You can do it without an agent, if that's the case.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, so I think that these actors give the whole industry a bad name. And, I'm looking forward to the cleanup.
Well, I think value will flow to the folks that are providing value to their clientele. And I think that's going to be the proof.
I've told Todd before, when all the latest agent and NAR lawsuit morass, I heard someone explain it like, if you have a superstar on your sports team, I don't watch much NFL anymore, but they usually seem to be wide receivers for some reason. But, they're just a pain in the butt, but they're good, right? Mm-hmm. So they cause all kinds of problems, talk smack to the coach and all that. As long as they're winning, oh, well, that's just him. It's, that's just him. When they start losing, and in this point, I'm transposing losing with affordability gets out of control, they start looking. Then it's a problem.
Yeah.
No, you know what I mean?
And all I want to say, just to continue the football analogy, if you want a realtor to help you, in any market, particularly a more challenging one like now, you want to try to get Tom Brady, and that's Todd Sachs is the Tom Brady.
Hey, I'd hire Todd. I am not a fan of realtors, and I will not be shy about it, but I would hire Todd in a heartbeat, and something good would probably.
Thanks, Cliff.
Oh, do you sell houses in Switzerland? Hey, just back for 1 second. The Fannie HELOC. When I tell you that I think the dollar's runway to demise is shorter than a lot of people think, it's that exact type of thing that I think is going to hasten and catch a lot of people by surprise when they think it's going to be some longer drawn-out process. And I would really like to put a mark in my calendar to talk to both of you guys a year from now. And if that happens, I will bet you anything it is going to be a colossal cluster, what.
Oh, I don't think either of us doubt that, and I think I don't see how that's not hugely inflationary too. And
the people will be. You think inventory's bad now, and people are stuck with 3% rates. You wait till they got a bunch of equity that they already spent from Uncle Sam. They're not going to be able to move to sell the house because they don't, and it'll turn into bailouts, which means it's going to turn into printed money, which means it's going to turn into the rest of the world looking at us thinking, what kind of hocus pocus dream world are those people living in?
I agreed, but just all I'll say is don't underestimate the stupidity of decision making in other countries too.
Yeah,
we will not be the only one doing dumb stuff.
I will not advocate a whole lot for his style of governing, but I do not think Xi Jinping nor Vladimir Putin are particularly stupid.
No, but the EU, the EU could easily.
Well, the EU is pretty close. The EU is burning coal to stay warm.
Yeah.
I agree. I love Europe.
All right, Mr. Angry says any industries you guys would consider recession-proof.
I got 4.
Uh-oh, that was quick. How'd you?
Yeah, because I felt bad about Mr. Angry, so because I wanted to make sure we got.
You could read it. I couldn't see it.
Consumer staples, AI, healthcare, and green energy.
Oil.
And oil. I wanted to put that on the list and probably think about it, but obviously in a recession, energy demand goes down. Traditional energy demand goes down.
Could you name your 4 one more time?
Consumer staples, AI, healthcare. AI, just because there's so much money that's going to be going into it, it's going to be a massive tailwind for a long time. Healthcare, and then green energy, because again, there's just a ton of government contracts that are going to be spent there for some period of time.
Printing money, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say if we're looking at careers, construction, blue collar work, HVAC, heating and air, and
Trades.
plumbing, trades. Yep, I think if you can build something, you're going to have a great job because people in the U.S. don't know how to do things.
Careers, I don't
Unfortunately.
know a lot about it, but I know some people who do. Network security, huge.
And probably attorneys.
And it's, well, jeez.
All right, here we go. Just so Mr. Angry here, only good thing about the railroad, it's seniority based, and with 19 years, my job is secure. Thank you, everyone, for your super chats tonight. We appreciate it. And Charles, again, I remember before COVID, Trump reduced the deficit. So what is stopping him from doing it again? Adam, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think forces stopping it from doing it again is just, our earlier conversation about president only has so much control. That being said, I will predict that if Trump gets elected and we don't have another massive curveball like a COVID, I think he will bring the deficit down at least as a percentage of GDP. So maybe it's a higher outlay eventually, but it's a lower percentage.
How do you, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm curious. How would you speculate he will do that?
Well, for example, I just mentioned, like a lot of the fiscal money that's being spent right now, right? Green energy, CHIPS Act,
Yeah,
whatever.
green energy, yeah.
He could start slashing that.
It's not funny, but like he says he wants to deport 12 million people. That's going to cost a lot of money.
Yep.
But
I think, I think, and also too, if we end up getting the type of recession that I think we could get, I could see that, there might be a lot of stimulus spent there, but also there would be massive rate cuts, and so that huge interest expense that we now have in the deficit would come down in that era.
Yeah.
All right, and then finally here, the land of the U.S. should not be owned by any foreign investor. Let them lease. P.S. As long as there's property tax, you don't really own. You try not paying your property tax and see what
Have you done a show on CBDCs, Adam? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I have.
Who was it?
Probably the most recent one was a panel I chaired at the New Orleans Investment Conference, and that video is up on my.
I've seen it. Yeah, probably what I'm thinking of is one of your shows, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and also probably more recently, I chaired a debate for Zero Hedge on the future of the dollar, and CBDCs were a part of that discussion.
Yeah, I
saw that was Brent, Michael Every, Jim Rickards, and Bob Murphy from the Mises Institute.
All right. Well, we could obviously
Did we
go
really
on for
go
hours
that
and
late?
hours and hours, but yeah, it's late here on the East Coast, and I know Joe and Melissa would like to sign off here.
I'm sure we've gone late.
Yeah, but it's always a pleasure, Adam. I love having you.
It was great to
on
meet
our
you,
show.
Adam.
You too, Cliff.
We'll talk
And a real
offline
privilege.
sometime about the Bay Area. I got plenty of .com war stories.
Look, anytime Todd wants me to come on the program, I'm here. Anytime you want to just talk offline, Cliff,
All right.
Have Todd give you my phone
Oh,
number.
I got some good ones, let me tell you. I'm sure you do too.
All right, guys, we thank you very much for spending your Tuesday evening with us. It was a long
Todd,
show.
thanks for having me on again,
Yep,
buddy.
You got it, man.
Appreciate it.
And look, and we can always look if you need to break it up in a couple segments, break it up in a couple segments. But certainly great information. We appreciate Cliff and Adam for being on our show. And cruise on over to Adam's his Substack, his X, and which X.com now. Elon Musk, good for him. He's got a one-letter domain name. That's sick. And check out Adam's Thoughtful Money on his YouTube channel. Great interviews, and we always appreciate, sir, what you
He was
bring.
saying something.
Hey, thanks so much. And if I could just say, because Todd, the last time we were on, I forgot to mention this, so I do want to mention it here, which is I created. So I've got I interview people all through the week. That's what I do for my day job. I have a Substack where every time we launch a new video, I send that video out to everybody. I also send a lot of other information. But for my premium Substack providers, I do a write-up, like a full write-up of what I took away from the video. It starts with a bulleted executive summary. So if you don't have a lot of time, you can just read the bullets. If you didn't watch the video but want my full thoughts, you can read the full, much longer summary. So for your audience, Todd, I've created a free 14-day free trial for the premium section. So if you want to just, hop in and enjoy the premium for 2 weeks, go to thoughtfulmoney.com/Sachs, SACHX. You don't have to convert afterwards. I just want to give it as a thank you to you all for slugging through this 3-hour video, but also
pin that
for
comment.
being so kind and bringing me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's great. Our audience would certainly love that, guys.
I'm gonna check that out.
We will pin that URL that you could click it right in the comments. We'll do that right away. And thank you so much, Adam.
Oh, like I said, Todd, it's just such an honor and a privilege to come on. And like I said, anytime you ask, I will do it.
I'm
Thank you, sir.
on with two legends. You talk about a privilege.
You're a legend.
Two
as
of
well.
them.
You're a friend. All right. Good night.
Thanks so much, gentlemen.